Welcome to this omnibus edition of Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Haydock, ask a special guest to choose a Doctor Who story. I'll watch it and commentate along and try to guess what their favourite thing about each episode of that story might be.
Hello Toby, it's me, David J Howe here. Now you may know me as a writer, as a researcher, as a publisher of all things connected with Doctor Who. But today I'm here to talk to you about one of my favourite stories. It's a story, Trout Nearer, as you can see my friend on the screen here, and it's The Mind Robber. Now, I believe I've got to come up with a few things that I like about this story, and you're going to try and guess or predict what I might come out with. So I'm just going to pause for a second to allow you time to talk a little bit yourself.
David J Howe, and who very kindly recorded his contribution on video. So you are robbed of the opportunity to see him as he was sitting in front of an enviably gargantuan television screen with the paws of Patrick Troughton's face appearing on the opening titles, which made for a stunning visual to accompany his introduction. As I record this, I'm concentrating very much on the audio versions of these Happy Times and Places podcasts. Podcasts, that should give the game away. Less time to do the videos, but at the time that David very kindly recorded his contribution, I did ask people to do audio and video, so he may well make some allusions to where he is or what picture we are looking at, and you won't be, so I will do my best to fill in the gaps. David is one of the first names of fandom I ever sort of got to know in terms of, reading publications, and I mean, I only got the odd fanzine here and there, but I knew his name from picking up bits and bobs. And then, of course, when fandom started to get really serious and publish proper books and proper fanzines that went above and beyond the sort of photostated story reviews and did proper serious research, David was at the forefront. The Frame was an excellent piece of work, and I remember being so admirable because it was a Doctor Who fanzine that didn't take its name as a pun from a Doctor Who story or a reference to something from Doctor Who specifically. So that was like, wow, it's very good. They haven't gone for Eye of Harmony or Perigosto stick or whatever. They've gone for The Frame. Makes it seem all grown up, and it was at a time when suddenly going, well, if we do something that isn't quite directly related to Doctor Who, it sort of makes it seem more grown up, and it really did. It was a really smart sort of marketing tool, if you like, and it was a very serious and well-researched publication that explored new areas. And then they did their handbooks of the Doctors and their 60s, 70s, 80s hardbacks with lots of pictures. And started delving into corners of research hitherto unexplored, and shaped a lot of our understanding of the early years of the show. Well, our correct understanding of the early years of the show. They opened up the sort of basics that we knew and delved in much more detail and gave a much more sort of fastidiously woven insight into particularly the early years of the show, but all of their stuff and their approach, really set the scene for the sort of more detailed and forensic way that we began to look at episodes and the people that were looked for and interviewed. So David is a trailblazer, and I've been lucky enough to get to know him at conventions and various other places. Always very helpful, always great to see, and he's a jolly good friend of Fraser Hines as well. I always think of David when I think of Fraser, and in fact David has helped with some of the DVD commentaries that we've done when Fraser's had to be on Zoom. David's been his sort of technical whiz. So contributions known about and unknown about in the world of Doctor Who from David, who's very kindly, I suspect, gone above and beyond the call of duty when it comes to recording his contribution to this podcast. And you won't see any of it, but you will hear him. And I'm very interested with the Mind Robber. It's a curious story, isn't it? It's atypical from, the monster doctor. It's no monsters here really. It's all, it's the land of fiction. It's this one used to be sort of lumped in with the Celestial Toymaker for me mentally. There were the two sort of weird avant-garde stories of the 60s: the Celestial Toymaker, basically board games turned evil, and the Mind Robber, the Doctor and co encountering literary figures from fiction. My first discovery of it was in a random Doctor Who magazine that I managed to get from somewhere. I think we bought it from a shop, or it had been lying around the house because one of my older brothers had bought it, or anyway. But it was certainly an early one that we had, and I remember reading about the cliffhanger to this episode of the TARDIS exploding, and that seemed quite extraordinary. How did they get out of that? And of course, the episode guides in Doctor Who magazine didn't show that. They only gave you the cliffhangers and the cast list. And you saw in the cast D'Artagnan and Sir Lancelot. So I imagined, this was a story sort of full of those sort of characters coming in and out and doing loads. And of course, actually, a lot of them just appear at the very end, as we'll discover. And then when I got it, when I started collecting, it was in decent quality. In Bootlegsville, there was a nice copy of it, so it was easy to watch without the sort of dissonance created by rolling pictures and muffled sound and terrible quality, like an oil slick has formed to create a semblance of what television used to look like. I enjoyed it very much. And I thought it really, held together. It's a good, solid production. But it's never been sort of there's absolutely nothing wrong with it in my eyes. But I'm never sort of wild about watching it. If I want to watch a Doctor Who that's kind of my idea of Doctor Who, it's never really the Mind Robber. And yet I have very few criticisms. I remember when it was repeated. They did a repeat season when I was a sort of sixth form college student, and the Mind Robber, although the BBC continuity announcer actually one day announced it as the Mind Robbers, and I remember that, and it echoed as well. They put a bit of echo on the continuity. But I remember I was working at a cafe at the time, and run by two gentlemen called Clive and Piers. They were a very colourful pair who owned this sort of health food cafe that I worked at called the Olive Branch in Ludlow. And Clive was very, very camp, and Piers was much more sort of studious, and they were sort of chalk and cheese, but really interesting, lovely guys. And I worked for them very happily for quite a long time. But I remember Clive coming in and saying, well, it's just the same thing happens every day. It's just they see a fictional thing and then they deny it. It's not very clever. And it really sort of poured cold water on a story that I thought had been, really imaginative and different, because his major take was, to be fair, a fairly obvious shortcoming with the story. But for me, it had always been because it was so different. And because the things that I'd worried about that wouldn't quite work about it actually were pulled off very well, because it's a very solid production. As I say, I've always been very fond of it, particularly this first episode, yet without ever, sort of scanning my DVD shelves and going, oh yeah, the Mind Robber's the one I've got to watch. So I haven't watched this in a very long time. And I'm intrigued to see how I appreciate it. Obvious with the caveat that I'm talking through all the hard-wrought dialogue the writer has slaved over and the actors have rehearsed, and I'm chatting away because that's the nature of these podcasts. But by way of quite a long introduction, partially because I know we've got time because it's only a 20-minute episode, but also partially because this is a difficult story for me to quantify in a way. I think it's very good. I've always admired and liked it and enjoyed it, but I never sort of go rushing back to it, and it's never one that I'd select as one of my absolute favourites, even though I actually have very few issues with it. And also, I think absolutely Doctor Who should do stories like this. I think I think for the Troughton, and I can completely understand people for whom this is a favourite Troughton, because the Troughton era is actually quite formulaic, but it's a formula that I really like, because it was the formula adopted by the stories that made up most of those early Target novels that I read, which was my sort of conduit to the olden days. So it's all about context and when you discover things and when you find them. But the other part of me would be contrarian, go no, because there's not many. I tend to stick up for stories that are disliked by fans because they're slightly atypical. They go, no, Doctor Who should be doing this sort of thing. So I don't know why I'm not a champion of the mind robber in a way that I might be. But anyway, let's see, because I certainly know that this is one of the finest episodes of Doctor Who of all time, episode 1 of The Mind Robber. It's an absolute masterpiece. So let us see what it has to offer. And I am going to press play in 3, 2, 1. The Mind Robbers, as that BBC announcer said. So, well, welcome. I mean, I do love a black and white Doctor Who, and I'm quite intrigued to see this because I haven't seen it for a long time. And as I say, it's one that weirdly I have a slightly mental block over. Approaching most stories, I sort of think, I know what I'm going to talk about with this one. But with this one, what I want to talk about is almost how I don't quite know how to talk about it. But I certainly always remember it was one that was in very reasonable quality. And of course, we have this slightly strange thing with season 6 is, of course, this story begins with escaping from the end of the Dominators, and curiously, it's not. They didn't do any of this at the end of the last story in order to have it in the can to start this story. This is, so it's a different volcano. I think it's just, this is all very much for this episode, and of course this story ends and sort of leads into episode 1 of the invasion. So you have this kind of continuity between stories. I love. There's almost nothing better than Patrick Troughton batting away smoke. It's got there's a kind of slight fear, desperation, and uncomfortableness that he does so well. But of course he's just come from the Dominators, where he's done no location filming, and now we're doing the Mind Robber, where the episodes are much shorter. But of course, because the regulars felt that they were carrying too much of a burden, and I'm sure we've covered that in the Seeds of Death, which I've already done, where they don't appear until quite late in episode 1. The space pirates, they don't appear till near the end of episode 1. But of course, this one they haven't quite got there yet. It's like, yeah, we'll promise we'll give you less to do. Here's an episode where it's just you three. I do like this this team, and it's David Maloney's first story as director, an atypical one for David Maloney, who would of course go on to be one of the premier directors of Doctor Who. He does this and the Crotons and the 10 parts of the War Games this season, and then he has a little sojourn with Pertwee, Planet of the Daleks, and then comes into his own, I think, with the Tom Baker, Philip Hinchcliffe, Robert Holmes era, where he does such great work on Genesis and Planet of Evil and Talons of Weng Chiang, and of course then goes on to be a producer of Blake 7. So and but what an interesting idea. The idea comes from, that's a lovely model shot. I mean, the lava looks perilously like foam, but then again, everything in the Troughton era looks perilously like foam. It's not the same sort of foam as Seeds of Death and Fury from the Deep, but it's still, and cyber chest units, etc. But it's still, unfortunately, it's you only have to vaguely resemble foam, and you're invoking other key elements of the Troughton era. It was full of lava, but what a great idea that Peter Ling, famous for Crossroads, which has enjoyed a resurgence in sort of public acknowledgement recently because of Russell T Davis's series about Noel Gordon, and I watched that, and then of course was immediately on YouTube looking at old episodes of Crossroads, and my goodness, there's some sights to behold in terms of acting, storytelling, everything. I mean, in some cases a work of glorious desperation. But Peter Ling had noted how people thought that actors playing characters in soaps were mistaken for the real thing by members of the general public. I've always found that really weird, and it's always to me a sign that democracy is perhaps on perilous ground when you give the vote to people who don't know that the people on television are actors saying lines that they've been given by other people, and they're not just people living their lives that cameras just happen to be transmitting to the rest of us. I mean, that's a basic. That's as much as understanding what toast is, or how to open a door. But it's beyond a great number of the British voting public. So they've moved out of Dominatorsville into the costumes that they now wear for. Well, Zoe has that her much better that Dominator's costume was falling apart, and now she's got her sequined catsuit, which is pretty cool. But yes, Peter Ling had noticed that actors got mistaken for the characters that they played. So he thought, well, what if there's a land where fictional characters exist? And the only way you can do that is this rather interesting thing of going, okay, well, we've got to take a step out of reality, which is an unusual thing for Doctor Who, and it's not something you'd want it to be doing all the time. This has to be quite an unusual story, and I'm glad we don't keep going back to this. This is almost crying out to be a one-off, although there is a very good Steve Lyons did a New Adventures. I've not read an awful lot of those, but it was recommended to me. And it's exit called Conundrum, which brings in various elements of the land of fiction, and that really works and very cleverly sort of ties in the fictional world of Doctor Who as we know it. And I think there is a story to be told in Doctor Who where maybe the Doctor lands in the present day. It would be very, very meta, and you'd have to be very careful with it lest it be too self-indulgent. But I think there is a story to be told where the Doctor lands and people go, hello, shooting at, well, you're Doctor Who. And he goes, no, I'm actually Doctor Who. And they go, yeah, whatever, but you're an actor playing Doctor Who. Look, your adventures have been on the telly for the past 60 years. And he goes, whoa, half a mo. And it's a cunning ploy by the land of fiction to fictionalise the Doctor. But obviously, in our world, Doctor Who is fictional, but in the world of Doctor Who, Doctor Who isn't. So I think there'd be something cool to be done there. And this is nicely sort of creepy, isn't it? This tantalising Zoe and Jamie, and I love the way that Maloney shoots these close-ups and superimposes, and they're both directed to sort of be slightly sort of childishly mesmerised. And this sets up that the TARDIS here is their kind of sanctuary to this weird, unknown nothing world outside, and it's done with very simple techniques really, and acting and shooting, but the idea is don't go out of the TARDIS, and that's a great setup for the drama of this episode. It's simply don't go out. You don't need any more than that, and it's really nicely done. And of course, the idea of being tempted by something is a creepy one, because temptation, well, it's part of the original sin, isn't it? But that seems somehow worse than duping. Showing somebody something that they desire, and not out of any avarice. They've not showed her a pot of gold. They showed her home. And I love the way that she goes out and disappears. I think that is so creepy. She could have just gone out and walked into the distance, but the fact that she goes out and disappears into the whiteness, I think is beautiful. And a lovely, that would have just, lock off the camera, she buggers off, unlock it. But it's a beautiful, sort of simple trick that despite its its outcome is greater than the simplicity of its enacting, if you like. And Troughton's great at doing all of this, serious stuff. He's really, tempt. See, the word tempt is very important. I do think that makes it much creepier, that you've been lured out by being shown something that that seems safe. It seems a cruel trick. Again, if it had been gold, if it had been lots of food, that wouldn't have been quite so, unpleasant in a way. And the fact that Jamie gets lost because he goes out to do the brave thing that Jamie would do and go, no, I've got to go and help Zoe. So they're being lured out, by the prospect of safety, or because they are brave, and as I say, that seems a particularly cruel trick, using sort of goodness against the person. It wasn't that the two companions were shown to be daft and didn't ignore the doctor's advice because they disagreed with him or whatever. They both had perfectly good reasons to do the stupid thing, which is to ignore the doctor. Troughton's great at all of this sort of stuff, and I like the chair being in the TARDIS control room. Now, here's a thing: it was a good quality copy that I had of The Mind Robber on, bootleg VHS, but like all videos at the time, that they weren't remastered so beautifully. So actually, whereas you can see the studio here just by nature of the fact that it's walls and floor, even though it's been painted white, there is a kink between the wall and the floor has that sort of skirting around it, the bottom of the wall. So just by the very nature of the different textures, you get shadow, and so it's not a white void. It's like a white studio painted white. But in the bootleg that I had, the quality was slightly compromised. So actually, it looked like a white void. It looked more like the white void in Warrior's Gate. So it was an example of where having a slightly compromised picture quality actually improved the experience of the episode, because when the quality is too good, you don't get the sort of the lack of shape that you really need to make this work, that you can only get if you film it not in a studio, but you can see the gap between the floor and the wall there. So it's not always nice to have it totally cleaned up. That's one of the rare examples where it's got too much perspective, as Spinal Tap would say. I do like this TARDIS team. Zoe hasn't been going all that long, and I've got a bit of a theory about Zoe that I might talk about later in terms of her screaming. I'll talk about it now. I don't see her screaming at the end of this episode being like a girl in peril screaming. I see it more as a sort of slightly strange, caterwaul of abstractedness. It's they're spinning around on the TARDIS console. She sees the Doctor. It's not a, oh, I'm scared of the monster, I'm screaming. It's more kind of, this place is a mind muck, I will say, rather than the word that rhymes with that, but that's what I'm alluding to. And so I don't see it quite in the same way as other sort of screamer companions. And Zoe is actually often tarred with the brush of being a screamer, and I don't really see her in that way, because there's quite a lot of moments where she's fiercely independent and isn't like that, and isn't, certainly is in contrast to Victoria, who screamed all the time. I don't see Zoe in that way, and I would take the scream at the end of this episode out of the screaming equation, if you like. And there's something about a bagpipe as well, isn't it? It's the perfect thing to be a sort of haunting lure, and you think of sort of the ghostly bagpipes luring people off the moors to their death. So it's a perfect medium to act as a lure, even though it has that sort of evocativeness of creepiness about it, even though it's not really supposed to, because it's for Jamie, it's supposed to be a comforting sound of home, but to us it has that sort of melancholy, frightening sort of echoing the phantom piper. So it has that with it as well. So it's got lovely. It's got it's got lovely ingredients to it, this, when it's having to do something very simple, which is basically say, you three regulars, you've got to carry the episode, and basically what you've got to do is not leave the TARDIS. See, that scream is an abstract scream. It's not saying, oh, Zoe's in peril. It's and actually when you hear the scream, she's got the smiling and the beckoning, and I love that, and the fact that they've turned from their own colours into the sort of negative, into they're all dressed in white. Again, it's a very simple device that I think works above and beyond what it is. All it is the two companions that we know dressed in white versions of their own costumes, but set against the void with that scream ringing out. The fact that this is a kind of weirdly vibed episode makes it, quite unlike anything Doctor Who has done to this point. And I think that's marvellous. Oh, see, she disproves my point there, that she screams. Ha ha ha. Okay, Zoe screams then. I still don't think of Zoe as a screamer. I don't know why. Troughton's so good at this. What a wonderful face that he has. And he's showing the sort of pain there and the concentration that he needs to have. But this is, essentially nothing has happened in this episode, but it's absolutely compelling. And again, is he going to vanish? Oh, look at that. That's so creepy and spooky. And the white TARDIS. Isn't that amazing? And again, this is none of the peril in this is the sort of peril that we're used to in Doctor Who. Strangers with guns, leering monsters, or an obstinate commander who wants to throw us in jail or thinks we're the enemy or whatever. This is the threat here is of depersonalization, of being denied the sanctuary. That's all it's saying about the TARDIS is, wherever we are, the only safe place is the, four walls or however many walls of the interior of the TARDIS. And you've got some stock costumes from Out of the Unknown, but they work perfectly well. They're good, they were hanging around in a cupboard. Bung them in Doctor Who, and they've got those lovely gun things and this effect that Maloney likes, that he uses a lot in the war games of these sort of or similar sort of. And that's a great shot, the way that Troughton runs and smothers the camera, and then we open on his back, and here they are back, and the normal colour. But so that was the threat was so abstract, the depiction of the threat was so simple, and yet I think it's really effective. I think it's really powerful, and in the context of Doctor Who at the time, where a lot of the adventures are so I can see why for some it was a sort of culture shock, going, this is not what we imagine Doctor Who to be. But I think it's breathtakingly original. I think this is a work of desperation. This episode is not written by Peter Ling. This is written by Derek Sherwin, although there is no writer's credit on this episode. The only episode of Doctor Who with no writer's credit. The Dominators a few episodes ago had an episode with no episode number credit. So, but I like little things like that where nothing's ever quite uniform or the same. But this has no writer's credit. And because it's written by the script editor Derek Sherwin, and is a work of, we need to add an episode to this story because of the fallout with the Dominators, where there was arguments and it was cut from 6 episodes to 5. So he's basically put a prologue onto the Mind Robber, and I think transformed it from being an interesting sort of oddball Celestial Toymaker kind of companion piece to being something rather more special. And actually, I think this episode is probably the best episode. There's a bit of repetition later, and the stakes don't necessarily seem quite so high all the time. And I think, later when they try and turn it into an Earth invasion story, it doesn't quite convince in that element. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I still think there's much joy to come. But I think this episode, for what it represents, is the ingenuity of Doctor Who. The ingenuity of Doctor Who when you've got to fill not 25 minutes, but 20 minutes with scant resources and into an existing segue from one story into another. I think it's an absolutely cracking piece of work. And Sherwin was a decent writer. And this is forewarning us about the unicorn, which comes in later. So, and a word for Jamie's costume. I actually prefer the costume he changes out over this, but I like that slightly thicker wainscot that he has, and the kerchief with the woggle that he has before he changes into the black polo neck. That they used that clip, that I can feel it, that vibration on the trailer that they did for this when it was repeated on BBC Two when I was a time teenager. And this is, look at the way Malone is directing this. He's very close on the faces of his actors, because again, it's all sort of rather abstract, and it's all about, I'm being dragged, but to where? We can't see where he's being dragged. It's being dragged into a black hole or into the mouth of a monster. It's all an abstract threat, and yet it totally reads because of the performances of the actors and because of the conviction of the direction. And this, I think, is a remarkable sequence. And if you're a kid watching Doctor Who, this is the TARDIS. This is the old reliable. This is the place you start the adventure from and end the adventure in. And it's just been blown to smithereens. And again, there's a certain abstraction about this, because when it blew up, we didn't see what was inside. You could see the sort of inside of the model, but it's not there to be entirely literal. This, and so now we've got this great sequence of it, spinning in the void, and see, I see that as a slightly sort of weird, sort of echoing, caterwauling addition to this sort of slightly odd, and the ethereal sounds and the Doctor spinning. She's pointing to him over there, and then we have him in kind of mid close up. So it's not, again, this is an attempt to suggest a sort of certain strangeness and a disjointedness. And then the TARDIS, floats away and disappears into the smoke, which I think is a fantastic episode ending. And I have to say, I think Maloney in the black and white era's episode endings are sometimes quite disappointing, because he usually fades to black before fading up the titles, and I think that takes a bit of a sting out of them. It's sort of like we draw quite slowly to a close and then bring up the titles, whereas I think the more effective Doctor episode endings are, that's why Barry lets through the screaming, it's, oh my God, whereas they're a bit more sort of slow burning and sort of, they're like chapter endings really, rather than cliffhangers, I would say, in Maloney's hands. I say that more as an observation as anything else. But that actually particularly works for that episode. I think it's I think it's a classic episode ending. I think it's really disturbing. I think it's really strange. I think all the particular ingredients, from the model shot to the fact that they're on film and the things spinning around to then the bit with Zoe, Jamie clambering on the console and Zoe screaming, and then the TARDIS console receding into the distance from a great height is beautifully put together. And the fact that they've been separated from the Doctor as well, which is not only has the TARDIS blown up, but the Doctor's been pulled away. This is high stakes stuff in an episode that's basically been about don't go outside. Why? Because it's all white. And there's some stock robot costumes out there, but we don't really know what they are. But it's basically been it's cold outside, don't go, but way more than a sum of its parts. So what's my favourite thing about episode 1? Well, it's hard. I think because episode 1 is episode 1. Episode 1 of The Mind Robber is a unique episode of Doctor Who in that way. In its conception as well as in its execution and its contents. But I think it has to be the white void. I think it has to be the simplicity of that. The fact that manages to be so scary. The fact that outside is dangerous, and yet it's not. It's not a vicious jungle with spiky plants. It's not. It's not a battleground. It's not somewhere with giant monsters snapping at the doors. It's just an eerie, spooky white void, and then the genius of the companions being negative versions of themselves, and the way that is executed. I think the strangeness of that. Well, is it that, or is it the end? Is it the episode ending? Because because it is a beautiful episode ending. The exploding of the TARDIS and the disappearance in the... I think that's probably slightly more palpable, actually, as a thing of excellence, is that episode ending. Because the blowing up of the TARDIS is a total, holy heck. And the way that it is done is very, very good. I think it's a moment that I can conjure in my mind's eye when I'm thinking about it. I can imagine every shot. I can imagine how Wendy Padbury says her lines. I can see Fraser Hines clambering on the console trying to operate the buttons. I can see the cutaways to the Doctor and the smoke, and I can hear that odd ambient sound that suggests that this is a weird, strange, abstract place. Yes, the episode ending, but I mean, I think that the best thing about episode 1 of The Mind Robber is that it is episode 1 of The Mind Robber, a unique entry into the canon that is strange and spooky and does brilliant things with barely any resources, including the resource of time, because it was written in a hurry. An absolute triumph. Not everyone's cup of tea. I can understand that. If you're used to stories with lots of hardware and lots of speaking guest characters and a palpable threat of a monstrous kind, I get it. But in the great vast mosaic of Doctor Who, which is this program of infinite possibilities and indefinable magic and flexible format, I think it does everything that a bold experiment with the format should do, and it does it very, very well. Top marks, The Mind, but with the caveat that yes, if it's not your cup of tea, I can kind of get why. But I think that's a triumph. But I'm choosing the episode ending. What is David going to choose for episode 1? And I bet he's gone to a real effort with the visuals. David J Howe. Oh yes, he's at what looks like a bar. He's got a massive bottle of something there, and a bottle of red wine as well, and a bell with wine on it. Is it going to be wine o'clock at David's house? He looks like he's wearing a sort of snakeskin type of jacket. It is wine o'clock.
So the first episode of Mind Robber, and probably my favourite thing about the episode at all, is the sound that the white robots make. They've got this really eerie, creepy, creaking noise that they make as they move around, which combined with the white void that Jamie and Zoe find themselves in is absolutely terrifying. And that's my favourite thing about the first episode.
And actually, when the camera panned up on David, there was a sign saying it's always wine o'clock. So, and David was wearing a fez, because fezzes are cool. So thanks, David. Good choice, because of course there's no incidental music in The Mind Robber. It is all done by strange ambient sound that is the result of the genius of Brian Hodgson, who is one of the great... I mean, we sing him as a hero of Doctor Who, but I still think he counts as an unsung hero of Doctor Who. He's the special sound of Doctor Who in the 60s, I think, is all through classic Who, but it transmogrifies what it does as a job. But I think the eerie weirdness that the soundscape brings to Doctor Who in the 60s at its best is a key element to what makes it a very special and a very different television program, and not just. I mean, it's to the fore here because this is a self-consciously weird story, but actually there are jungle sounds and there are space sounds that do create an odd, discordant mood that makes Doctor Who truly weird in a way that I contend it never was quite after the 60s. Maybe the odd story here and there, but I think it was a consistently sort of slightly strange show, slightly more oddball than we often consider it to be. I think particularly the Hartnell era, where alien kind of meant alien. It meant strange. It meant weird. It didn't mean just people with blue faces and funky names, who sort of spoke like Royal Shakespearean Company actors. There was an attempt to make it, but in a way we realised that was perhaps a step too far away. But I think Doctor Who, in its sound in the 60s, there are real attempts to evoke strange new worlds, to steal a phrase from somewhere else, and that's particularly to the fore here because there's no music, and there's no music in the Crotons either. Maloney again there uses the sort of special sounds to dictate the mood, and it's a smart move. You can do it with sci-fi. It means we don't get sort of particular musical stings or stabs that underscore the drama or the emotion in the way that you expect from normal drama. But great, because Doctor Who is sometimes not normal drama, and that's what makes it special. So I think the sound that accompanies that white void that was nearly my choice, and that does accompany that cliffhanger that was my choice. I don't get the point for it, but I feel we are bedfellows in terms of our appreciation there of episode 1 of The Mind Robber. So what a treat that episode was. Strange, abstract, beguiling, nothing quite like it anywhere else in the history of Doctor Who. But I can just see out of the window. It's my childhood home. So I think I'm just gonna go and take a look out there. It looks safe. Welcome back to Happy Times and Places, but I'm going to remove you from the ordinary universe of podcasts and displace you from reality into one of the total fantasy that is The Mind Robber, where my special guest is the entirely fictional David J Howe. He only exists as the name on the spines of books like Doctor Who's handbooks and the 60s, 70s, 80s that he wrote with Mark Stammers and Stephen James Walker, and were books that took great strides in Doctor Who research and its presentation. And he, of course, runs Telos Publishing as well. And not to mention the Target book, which I think is, was a well overdue study of those really important aspects of Doctor Who's history. So, David's been there leading the way. Also a very nice chap who I always enjoy meeting when I go. It's the only times I think I've ever properly hung out with David is when we've been guests at conventions. But he always seems very pleased to see me, and his wife Sam is very lovely, and I very much enjoy their company. So I was delighted when David lent his name to this podcast, which he did. I mean, he recorded this stuff on video, which you went to great effort to do, and you're only getting the audio because I'm doing these as podcasts just at the moment, because at the time of recording, I'm also writing a book about Quatermass, and I'm trying to write some spec scripts, and I've got a not 100% healthy partner at home, and I've got to walk the dog, and I've got a whole list of things to do in the house. So something had to go, and it was my YouTube videos. But hopefully this podcast is enough to get the measure of David, who is a Doctor Who fan of, I was going to say of old, but that's age is not a thing to label anybody with these days, because it makes us all feel like we're getting a bit over the hill, says he with a frozen shoulder. So of yore, a Doctor Who fan, a Doctor Who fan of great vintage, steeped in the history of the show, rich with the tannins of 6 to 405 line broadcasts, and was there at the time, and is a big fan, as he said, of this very unusual Doctor Who story, The Mind Robber. There is not really one quite like it. I love the new series of Doctor Who, but it's rare that it goes as bold as this. I don't know if anyone would quite forgive Doctor Who in this prosaic day and age that we have. I mean, I suppose The Frog on the Chair was a pretty brave attempt to do something abstract and strange, but a lot of people kicked back on that and went, "Oh, this is ridiculous." I mean, Doctor Who is ridiculous, but I suppose the key to most successful Doctor Who is actually for it to sort of hide its ridiculousness or play its ridiculousness totally seriously, and sort of try and kid you that what you're watching, albeit it's about somebody who travels through space and time in a police box that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, is not ridiculous. Whereas, it's a rare story that goes, come on, let's embrace the fact that this is a bit way out there, and presented in such a way. Although this story is actually presented in quite a prosaic way, isn't it? And I remember if you recall last episode when I was working at a health food cafe, my bosses, who were quite open to old Doctor Who, etc., found this a bit too straightforward. The when is a door not a door and all of that. Found it a bit too straightforward a presentation of what could be a potentially really crazy idea. Whereas other people that walked in on me when I watched this, as I was always hoping people would, and become converted to the ways of Doctor Who, as we will discover as I talk through this, found it quite beguiling and strange, which is definitely what they're aiming for. There's abstract ideas here, and I remember reading about this in the Doctor Who magazine episode guide, and the idea of Jamie and Zoe being sort of shut into the pages of a book as they are at the end of a few episodes' time. I was like, this is really strange. This is not like a Doctor Who story that I was brought up to think of Doctor Who stories being. And I think it still does exist largely on a sort of little peninsula all of its own. So let's see what happens when we get to episode 2 of The Mind Robber, which I am going to start watching in 3, 2, 1. So it's this is where the story starts proper, really. What we watched last week was a prologue, a very effective prologue, beautiful prologue. And there are some episode ones that I'm usually quite impatient with episode ones. I'm quite keen for the story to get going, but I think especially now that I know a story, and I don't need any mystery really when I watch Doctor Who story, because I kind of know what's going to happen. So it's more that the other things that that I tune in to watch. But actually, it's such an exercise in mood and beguilement, episode 1, that it stands on its own as a masterpiece of Doctor Who. And look at that wonderful shot of Jamie and Zoe on the TARDIS, and it's a slight re-edit, isn't it? She looked like she was yawning then. It's a slight re-edit and of that brilliant episode, but it's still an amazing sequence, isn't it great? That they're sort of stuck on the TARDIS console and it's spinning around. I think it's and Troughton, eyes closed. What's happened to the Doctor? He's shutting out some force, and he's it's quite desperate because he's having to sort of summon all his power to look after himself, and they've had to sort of disappear into the void. But then it goes from that sort of strange weirdness into this quite clumpy sort of fairly wooden set, but that is actually a thing of great genius. And the designer is Ivan Hercules, which I think is a wonderful name. I think he was an Australian. He is on the... this is Philip Ryan here as the Redcoat. Gets a credit, doesn't have any lines. He was also one of the Primords in Inferno. But again, what I love about this, I think, is again, something has had to happen because of a production issue, and the production issue is that Fraser Hines has got chicken pox. So actually that first bit we saw is recorded next week, isn't it? And they've had to go, right, Fraser Hines is off for a week. What do? Thank goodness he got chicken pox during a story set in a world of absolute weirdness. And I love this design of... it is all a bit fairy tale. It deliberately is sort of aping those picture books that we had when we were a child. So those massive doors with the creak. It's all, Doctor Who is at its best when it takes the familiar, particularly from childhood, and has it sort of writ large. And Evan Hercules' design does that, and he's got an earring, and he's quite Australian. And then not long after, it's a little death notice for him in the Guardian. But he's interviewed on the making of for this, where he didn't seem to be particularly old either. But and I think he moved to ITV not long after this. But it's his sole Doctor Who. Here we have the confusing thing of a character being called the Master, and we don't see his face, but it's not your actual master. But yes, but and this is typical sort of Doctor Who fare. This is for those that are after a sort of sci-fi kind of thing. You know, the cowled figure, the sort of possessed older geezer, you know, with black leather gloves. Well, that's what that certainly looks like, isn't it? Because actually, I think later on he's just got little wooden fingerless mitts, which are much more charming. But that's you know, that's more sort of in the Doctor Who stratosphere, if you like. Whereas all the stuff that's going on here is still in the sort of strange fairy talesville, and especially the fact that Jamie has lost. Jamie has been turned into a cardboard cutout. I mean, you'd get that sort of Jamie in the shops nowadays. Somebody did get me a Matt Smith like that, and I've had a David Tennant, but they're things that I've had to give away because I was moving about, and I sort of wish I'd kept them now. But I do have a two-dimensional Dalek that my kids gave me. It's one of the fat-backed Daleks, but you can't see its fat back when it's only two-dimensional. Maybe it's their attempt to turn it into a piece of fiction to mean that those fat multicoloured M&M Daleks, Swiss Army Daleks, never existed because it's a two-dimensional version. But my son's got me for Christmas and is looming at me, and it's actually quite effective as a cardboard cutout. But Jamie Trout is very good at Trout and getting confused between the two shouting at him, and I like that sort of childish, sort of petulant. I can't cope with this. Nowadays, you'd say he's struggling to process. I'm a bit like that. I don't like it when more than one person is talking to me, or somebody's trying to instruct me to do something when I'm concentrating on something else. I very much identify with the Doctor there. But yes, Jamie is a two-dimensional cardboard cutout. That's great, isn't it? That's a bit Truman Show, isn't he, when he says about the light, and it's pretty obvious the studio lights sort of come on. It's, you know, it's slightly meta, this is really ambitious for Doctor Who, which tends to tell stories about aliens invading a base. Do you know what I mean? Or nice, peaceful aliens on an alien planet getting invaded by nasty alien monsters. You know, this is something quite different. And I'd seen pictures of these toy soldiers and thought they looked pretty good in the pictures. But you know, I'm well used to pictures that look great in Doctor Who magazine not being so great when confronted with the actuality. And actually, I think the noise that the soldiers make, their clunky gait, the design of them, they're a thing of genius. They're a childhood clockwork toy. You know, writ large, and again the sound really helps. They have that really slightly disconcerting sound, and we've only seen their feet so far as well, so that's nice direction from David Maloney. But yes, Jamie is a cardboard cutout. We still haven't got back to him, and now we have, that's brilliant. The subtitle said Lilliputian and then speaks Brobdingnagian. Oh, well done, subtitles person who's obviously done your research into Lemuel Gulliver, because I wouldn't have known which was Lilliputian, which was Brobdingnagian. But I remember being so impressed when I read about them in the archive of Doctor Who magazine that all of Gulliver's lines were actually lines from the book. A little bit later, there was an article, when the examinations got a bit more detailed. Maybe it was an interview with Peter Ling, actually, that said that all the lines were his actual lines. That some of the lines are, half measures, or they're messed about with slightly or whatever. But that, you'd only know that if you went and studied the text in great detail and compared and contrasted, and not many of us are going to do that. And yes, I'm sort of glad somebody did for the sake of an article. But I think there's enough effort has gone in to make Gulliver's speech, so it means that the speech is slightly disjointed, the communication is slightly disjointed, because he's obliged to answer in a particular way, and that kind of comes across, that disjointedness in the conversation that these two have, because he's using lines. The only thing Gulliver can say is stuff that Gulliver says in the book. That is such a brilliant use of the idea, a bit like Officer Crabtree and Hello Hello, where they've gone, well, people in dramas of this kind, they speak in the accent of the country they're from, if in order to suggest that they're speaking in a foreign language. But therefore, if somebody is speaking that foreign language badly, the accent and pronunciation will be wayward. That is such a genius idea within the context of the world they've created in Hello Hello. One of the best ideas ever, and I love Officer Crabtree. And the same as this, where they've gone, we have a land of fiction, so let's have a fictional character. Let's have Gulliver being all strange, and I love the fact he's billed as a stranger. Not stranger, not the stranger, but a stranger, just to give it a literary little echo of like a list of dramatis personae. It just makes it a little bit more fictional. I love a little touch like that. I think you only ever get it one other time in Doctor Who, and that's when Pat Gorman is credited as a medic in The Invisible Enemy, which seems strange and archaic by then, but I'll still take it because I like it. But yes, so I love Gulliver. I love the idea of going, we've got these fictional characters and let's go to a little effort with it and make him speak only in his lines, which makes for that discourse between the two of them to be slightly strange, and therefore slightly, even though he's a benign character, there is something slightly threatening about the fact that he's slightly offbeat, in terms of the way that he communicates. And now we've got these kids, which is very interesting. And a few of them have turned up. I think one of them turns up as a Sontaran in the in the Sontaran's return story in Modern Who as a non-speaking extra. Non-speaking Sontaran extra, because I think he's not huge in stature. And I love all of this because you have to, we're used to stuff like this always being done in real time. So it's, to actually see the sword disappear, and I don't know if it was a cut, but it certainly doesn't look like it. So it's done effectively enough. And there's a lot of little sort of visual and technical tricks that are done very effectively in this. To suggest that, it is a land where the normal physical rules don't quite apply. And that, again, whereas the threat often in Doctor Who comes from a gun or a sword or a piece of jeopardy, the threat here comes from the fact that you can throw a sword in the air and it comes down as a book, and you go, that's not a threatening moment per se, but it is saying that the laws of normality have been transmogrified into a world where anything can happen. And books are, when you read a book, you conjure sometimes impossible images because that's what words can do. That's why words are so effective. But we're watching that on television. So on television, we're used to being much more literal and only dealing with what you can see, and with Doctor Who, with it being quite a science-based program, that any occurrences, even if they're sort of space age and slightly crazy, have a sort of scientific rigor or an attempt at scientific reality about them. It's not a magic show, Doctor Who, and suddenly we find ourselves in a world where those rules don't apply anymore, and I think that's really refreshing and really interesting. But it's also got this rather sort of quaint, we've got riddles, riddle me ree, and Jamie is safe and well, and it shows the Doctor using his imagination, and there's a lot of quick cutting here, which for something where we're used to continuous recording, we've got things appearing and disappearing, and suddenly changing off camera, and then we cut, and then they, and it's David Maloney not being too self-conscious in his trickery. He's just sort of allowing it to happen, but then it surprises you when it does. And this is wonderful because this to me is a sort of pre-echo of that lovely stuff in the Crotons where he keeps getting everything wrong. I like the fact that Troughton, is slightly sort of flawed, and yeah, there we go. Oh no, he's got it wrong, but it's too late. We've got the wrong Jamie. And here is Hamish Wilson, who I had the pleasure of interviewing over the phone for Who's Round. I then met him later at a convention, and it's interesting. He never sent back pictures if you sent them to be signed. So I thought maybe he doesn't like signing things. But and a few people said, if you ever meet him, can you get him to sign pictures for me? And I asked him to sign some stuff at a convention. He was like, yeah, absolutely. And he signed some stuff for my friends. And I thought, well, I've asked him for 3 now, so I can't really ask him to sign my book. And he was giving no signal that he didn't want to. But I didn't ask him to sign my thing because I thought, I'm sure I'll see him again. And so I never got Hamish Wilson's autograph for myself, but I did get it for other people. But interesting, he was very lovely over the phone and very lovely in person, but he never sent photos back that he'd been signed in the post, in my experience and experience of other friends of mine. It's funny how we all have our things or our lines that we draw, isn't it? But I really like his Jamie. I mean, he's got a different accent and different voice to Fraser Hines, but I think he plays and again, he's been shipped in at the last minute, and I think it's a really nice addition to Who Lore that we have a kind of an alternative take on Jamie for a week because of Fraser Hines's chicken pox. And I love the fact that the show, at the last minute can go, okay, well, let's bung that in the script. And as I think I started saying and interrupted myself, isn't it great that didn't happen when he was, fighting a seaweed monster on a gas base, or hiding in the sewers for the Cybermen? Because what would you have done? They'd have written him out in some other way, in the way that they write people out when they're on holiday. But at least they can plan the holidays. Here, this is something that happened during the production, and they have to produce something out of necessity. I love that. That's the whole story of making television. That's the whole story of creativity. That's why I like doing live stage work, because actually when things go wrong, that's when the magic is produced. And I do think it is a kind of magic. I think creativity is magical, and disaster and adversity create situations that would otherwise never occur. So then the solutions to them are so special to that moment and to that occasion and to that confluence of people and ideas. And it creates something. And creativity is great. And the fact that we know the story behind all of this stuff gives us an extra into it that actually helps us a little bit more than if we were just viewers at the time for whom this is a perfectly organic part of the story, it seems. It's part of this strange, weird, abstract world. I love it when the Doctor has to admit to Zoe that he's made a foul up of something because he doesn't like her being right all the time. But the beauty is she quite often is. I love that gag. I love the Doctor being a little bit vulnerable. I love the dynamic that he has with her. I really do like Hamish Wilson's performance as Jamie. He went on to be a fine radio producer. He died of COVID, sadly. I wrote his obituary for the Herald in Scotland. Pleased to do so. But he was when I sort of encountered him, he was a bald, bearded man. But he was a highly regarded radio producer, pioneering radio producer who produced hours and hours and hours of radio. But here he was as a young actor in London. Suddenly, do we know any Scotsmen? He was doing a day job at the time. This is the bit where my sister's boyfriend at the time, who was a hippie called Rots, R-O-T-S, Rots, his real name was Stephen, I think, but he was, and a lot of my sisters and brothers' friends would, be a bit snooty about Doctor Who. It was a time when it was quite cool to be sort of, Doctor Who's rubbish. I liked it as a kid, but actually it's rubbish now. And I remember Rots walking in and going, wow, man. And he really was a sort of stereotypical hippie. He was a lovely, gentle fellow who was, curious and interested. He's I think they're still in touch. I've probably got him. I think he's a dad of about 1 million now. No, I think he's got a few kids, and he's a lovely guy, motorcyclist. But he, I remember him kind of go, wow, man, a forest of words. That's a really cool idea. And I love the fact that, he was totally taken with that. And I do think the fact that these funny trees that look like a sort of Doctor Who set, suddenly you go, oh no, because I've got a different perspective on them because we've climbed up and shot them from the top. I know it's a model. And suddenly they're in a forest of words. I think that if you want to know why Doctor Who is a brilliant show, the fact that its protagonists can get lost in a jungle where the trees are the letters of a book and it's a forest of words. I mean, isn't that just a magnificent idea? I think it really is. I think it's a hugely imaginative idea. And, we're watching people of a fiction caught up in an actual environment of fiction. I mean, this is before, you'd ever apply meta to anything, or even maybe aspire to that. They were just trying to do a Doctor Who story that was, and maybe they were unfamiliar with Doctor Who, or maybe they just wanted to shake it up a little bit. But for whatever, it's an idea that's so utterly Doctor Who, a forest of words, and yet so utterly unlike anything in Doctor Who almost before or since. And I love the way that even though he's a fictional character, and there's a lovely gentleness here to Bernard Horsfall in the first of his many Doctor Whos, is that Gulliver, despite being a fictional character, is brave and will sort of stand guard while they hide. But of course, I think he doesn't see them, does he? So he gives them away, but not because he's a malignant presence. He gives them away because he does not see them. And this is a nice differential kind of set. It's got the sort of metal gantries, and it's got the TV monitor screens, and it has a slightly different texture to the rest of it. So congratulations, Ivan Hercules. I think he's done a magnificent job sort of bringing this world together, but also differentiating between the different threatening environments within it. And I love the way that the Doctor doesn't really blame Gulliver there. I think that's nice. And what a reveal! It's got a key on its back, and it's a toy soldier, and they move like toy soldiers. I think that's a magnificent design, taking something from a childhood toy box and making it a threat. And it's a terrific design. It's augmented by the noise. One of those toy soldiers was my agent for a while, Richard Irison. I was quite pleased when he became my agent because he'd been in Doctor Who. But, you get over that eventually and have to go, I can't just stick with somebody because they were in Doctor Who once. And here we have the callback to Jamie's dream in episode 1. And we have another expedient born out of disaster, is that they got a unicorn that was the wrong colour, so they had to paint the poor horse in Blanco, didn't they? And again, this is such a simple thing. It's a horse that they've had to paint. It's the Doctor and his companions on a completely blank set on a shiny studio floor with a bit of film of a horse that they've had to do things to at the last minute. And all those things have been combined together to make the cliffhanger. Fraser Hines and Hamish Wilson, love it. Yes, I mean, this is the beginning. A stranger, look at that. This is the beginning of the slightly repetitive. It's Christopher Reynolds, I think, who's the one that who's the child that turns up in the Sontaran Stratagem 2-parter. It's one of a run of cliffhangers, this, isn't it? Where the Doctor's going, no, don't run, and we're thinking, why not? And it's because you get to say, I don't believe it. It's a fictional thing, and unfortunately, I fear that's where my bosses at my cafe started to, I think, find the story a little bit repetitive, because they mix up the threats, but the solution to them is the same. Will I forgive that on this watch? Let us see. But I have been asked to be, acknowledge through the positivity, acknowledging some potential shortcomings. So that's one I anticipate. But for now, again, I thought that was another phenomenal episode of Doctor Who because, vive la différence and its game attempt to do something with this format of a show where you can travel through space and time in a police box that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, and go, okay, well, alien monsters, it's sort of cowboys and Indians in a way, isn't it? It's Roundheads and Cavaliers. It's one armed threat against another armed defender, and depending on whose side you're on, there are goodies and baddies. And when it's monsters in Doctor Who, you can add a design element that makes them uniquely scary and memorable for kids. But the template is often very, very similar. And this has gone. No, I'm going to completely shake that up. And in fact, the monster here is a toy soldier, and that's such a good design. I'm talking about the design a lot. So well done, Evan Hercules. I love the Forest of Words idea. I think that's a beautiful thing. So I think going into this, I think I was going to go, I love Hamish Wilson because I like his performance. I think he's a really likable and cheery take on Jamie. And he doesn't try to do an impression of Fraser Hines, and I don't think that matters. I think he's very much his own Jamie, and I like that. And I like that as a contrast to the Jamie that we know and love. And I love that it was born out of necessity. It was born out of disaster. And I love it when Doctor Who comes up with an inventive solution. And again, thank God it happened in a story that was about, reality being, bent into the abstract. But I love the fact that exists as a thing that happened for that particular week of Doctor Who, and it gives a little bit of, a little bit of notoriety for Hamish Wilson, who went on to have a different career, wonderful career in radio. But he's got that one-off thing as he's the guy that played the different version of a Doctor Who regular for that 1 week, although it ends up being 2 episodes because of the way that they structured it and shot it in bloody blah. But I think that's a marvellous, wonderful thing. And I love that they get him in on the DVD commentary too. And he was a nice chap. Wish I'd got his autograph. I'm quite shy. And so listen, and annoyingly, because as I say, he was giving no indication that he didn't want to sign it, but because he'd not sent the pictures back. And as I say, I discovered later, loads of people said, no, we sent him pictures and he never sent them back, but he was quite happy to sign in person. As I say, we all have our things. But he was showing no sign of getting bored of signing autographs. So I hope my friends Ben and Lee and Stephen are very happy because they've got Hamish Wilson's autograph and I haven't. Anyway, why do I obsess on things? I'm so sorry. And I'd probably completely forgotten about that, but now here's a reminder, and all my regret, and it will start to see a domino effect now of other related regrets I have in my life, and I will end up curled up in a ball, berating myself for things that happened in the past that I now have no power to change. Oh, we're a mixture of funny old things rattling around our badly circuited synapses, aren't we? Anyway, so I was going to choose Jamie, but I'm so love that Forest of Words, and I so love that memory of Rots coming in and go, wow, man, that's such a great idea. I really do like Evan Hercules' design, from the sort of fairy tale door to the Forest of Words to the then, what they do when they've actually got pretty much nothing, an airfield and a horse and our regulars in a corner of the studio. I love Gulliver, and I love that idea of him only speaking his own lines. But I think from watching it this time, bearing in mind, of course, that I'm also talking through it, so my experience is not the same as when I just sit and watch it and soak it up. I miss so much when I'm talking because I'm having to, broadcast and convey thoughts and observations and enthusiasms and sometimes regrets about not having a scribble on a bit of paper. But I think I have to go where I'm being pulled, to the Forest of Words. I think the idea of a forest made up of letters of a book is just so brilliant. It ties in with this story. It is an embodiment of why this story is so unique. It is something so utterly Doctor Who and yet so unusual for Doctor Who. It allows for a clever design. It allows for a little bit of a meta interpretation. It allows for, a sudden change in perspective, completely altering your view of the world that you are in. It allows for the idea that creativity and literature can provide mystery and strangeness, and again itself a sort of change in perspective. So you could be a bit sort of wanky about it if you like, but it's also a fun idea. It's also an idea that having had them sort of run around in that set and then Jamie get up and look and you go, oh, okay, yeah, cool, I can see that now. So it's an enjoyable revelation as a viewer as well. But I just think it's such a brilliant idea to have gone, okay, this land of fiction, which is a strange idea that doesn't necessarily hold for much drama once you've gone, okay, this is where everybody who's fictional lives, which, let's think about it, is a real mind screw of an idea. But to then get, you then have to get drama out of it and jeopardy out of it, which is probably the story's least successful element because of the repetitive elements that I've talked about, though they haven't happened yet. But to say, okay, we're now in a land of fiction. What kind of things are we going to have here? Yeah, we're going to have a fairy tale door. Yeah, we're going to have a riddle, which isn't necessarily part of the fictional lexicon, if you like, but it evokes those books that things that we read as kids and folk tales and blah blah blah. That is obviously stuck in there in order to help with the changing Jamis face bit. I mean, the changing Jamis face bit is wonderful, and Troughton's reaction and Troughton's guilt and all of that. Oh well, we haven't had that yet, have we? We have the thing with Zoe asking him, but she only realises he made a foul up of it next week. That's right. So another of the consequences of talking all the way through it. You don't necessarily pick up exactly what's being said, but yes, that makes for that wonderful dynamic next week. So the changing of Jamis' face is a delightful thing because it has the flaws of the second Doctor. It's just a brilliant idea, and that faceless cardboard cutout Jamie, that's our Jamie who we know and love, and he's suddenly two-dimensional. I mean that he's a two-dimensional cardboard cutout, which fictional characters can sometimes be. But to see him reduced to that and with his face removed is a really upsetting image as well. But it's also strange and unsettling and weird and again works on a number of levels. Oh, it's so clever. Again, I think I might be imposing some of this upon it. I'm not necessarily sure that a lot of this was the author's intention, but that doesn't matter as our storytelling and our analysis gets digs deeper than perhaps anyone originally intended. I think it's legitimate to sort of go, well, this can work on that level, even if that was not the intent. But it was certainly an attempt to look at, how we deal with fiction and how we take fiction to be real and what that consequences of that might mean. It's born out of a society that was getting attuned to, even if incorrectly, the what was coming out of television screens and how that impacted on society and the blurring of reality and fiction and what that does to us. I mean, it's a fascinating concept and it's a brilliant idea. And as I say, not they don't necessarily explore a lot of that. Literally within the drama, but it opens up those sorts of thoughts and possibilities, and that I think makes it really intriguing. So well done, Peter Ling, and part of that is the idea of creating this forest of words. So the environment itself, is an embodiment of the idea of the fiction within which our fictional characters find themselves. How brilliant! So yes, despite the face-changing thing, which I think is probably what David will choose, but despite the excellence of Hamish Wilson, despite the fact that it was a last-minute resort to cover the illness of a member of the cast, and an ingenious one at that was fortunate enough to be set in a story where you could do something like that. Oh, so, all of that stuff, which again, that's us knowing the facts of this fiction. Oh, and the fact of fiction. What a better title than The Mind Robber. I'm glad that it's been used in Doctor Who magazine for its series of articles, but The Fact of Fiction is one of the beautiful titles we never got but should have had. We did eventually get The Hungry Earth, but that was one for Frontios, wasn't it? That's a better title than Frontios. The Day That God Went Mad would have, I think, made The Face of Evil seem slightly stranger. I love The Face of Evil, but anyway, that's a story for another day. The Mind Robber episode 2, I am choosing The Forest of Words. I could have chosen anything around the new Jamie, from concept to execution to performance to the real story behind it. I could have chosen the toy soldiers. I could have chosen Ivan Hercules' excellent design. I could have chosen the presence of Lemuel Gulliver speaking the words from the book, all of that stuff. But I'm going to narrow it down to The Forest of Words, and let's see what David J Howe chooses. Bet it's something to do with Jamie's changing face, especially as he's Fraser Hines' very good friend.
So the second episode of Mind Robber And the best thing about that is the fact that Jamie is not in it. Not because we miss him, it's just they've done it so well. Fraser Hines got chickenpox on the day that they were meant to be recording. And so rather than use him, they came up with this great invention that he'd have his face changed and it would change in the episode, which is actually a stroke of genius. And it's probably the only story that they could have actually done that with, which is incredible.
David is there in a lovely sort of Indiana Jones type of hat with a head torch and is feeding the fire. He is putting logs on a wood burner in his house for anyone that wants to conjure the image there. Oh, and there's a cat scratching pole behind him. So that's David in his home, dressed as a kind of sort of, I mean, it could be his own kind of Doctor Who there, sort of Indiana Jones Doctor Who type. I mean, if I'd played this game with any smarts, I would have chosen that because I had an inkling David was going to choose that, even though Fraser is one of his best friends, and it was a way of getting rid of Fraser. But he's right. All of the, I mean, he said basically all the things that I said about why the Jamie thing is so effective. But on this particular watch, I was drawn particularly to the Forest Words. I went into this episode thinking I would choose Jamie, and I went with my gut because I'm never going to win this. So I think one just has to try and be true to oneself. I mean, it doesn't matter, does it? I haven't stumbled across some great truth there, have I? But I wanted to choose the Forest Words, so I did. Yeah, I'm not gonna puff it up any more than that. It's not some great principled stand. It's not some great philosophical viewpoint. I thought I would choose Jamie. I kind of knew David would choose it, but I really wanted to talk about the Forest of Words, and I think it's brilliant. Even though I think the Jamie thing is brilliant as well, and a pretty smart choice and a deserving a thing that definitely deserves to be chosen. But I've never been one to give myself an easy win, which is why my life is a series of frustrations, disasters, and underachievement. Even when there's an open goal, I sometimes somehow contrive to miss it. But there we go. That's why I am always struggle with reality and am much, much happier in a land of fiction. Well, welcome back to this all too real podcast that centres around an all too unreal fictional world of Doctor Who in a fictional world of the land of fiction, where fiction meets fiction in a story that was originally called The Fact of Fiction, which I think is a beautiful title. These episodes are very short. This one is only 19 and a half minutes long, and it's not the shortest one. So, I mean, it was manna from heaven in those days of videotape bootlegs, because its shortness meant you could fit another episode on your E180. I'm inspired. I've been talking to Ian Key, who is one of the lovely residents of Patreonville, but also someone who's someone I know as a friend personally as well. And Ian and I were talking based on an AMA that I've done also in Patreonville about video bootlegs that we had to collect back in the day when even videotapes of Doctor Who were official video releases were scant in the shops. I mean, they came out very much every now and then, and they were, when they started, edited down, truncated into omnibuses. Nothing like what you can do now, which I'm about to do. Watch an episode on BritBox that I've also got on DVD on my shelf, and also at one point had on VHS, but I finally did get rid of my VHSs, and I do kind of regret that. But you can't keep everything. And in fact, we're trying to downsize the house at the moment, and my office is full of stuff, that would have been thrown away had I not rescued it from other people's houses, like Paddy Russell's files, Bernard Kay's. I've just taken delivery of a load of theatre programmes from a guy that my uncle found in a junk shop that the guy didn't want any money for. He wanted them to go to a good home before he chucked them away. So there's only so much space. But yes, this I did have this on VHS, on bootleg and on official. But I still have it in multiple copies. But yes, I was saying that talking to Ian has made me think I think an indefinable magic, which is if you only listen to these commentaries, do have a listen to Indefinable Magic. I think they're my favourite ones to do, which are sort of essays on particular aspects of Doctor Who, and increasingly they're getting sort of autobiographical and trying to sort of encapsulate the fan experience. Maybe I need to be bolder and do one about tea. That's one on the list, or Australia. But the ones that are easier to write because they're born out of just memory. But are ones like the Target books and blah de blah, and the one I've been thinking of is doing one about collecting bootlegs, because that was very much a rite of passage. That was very much a very exciting part. Well, full of excitement, expectation, disappointment, and all sorts of things unique to the collecting of Doctor Who video. There's an excellent documentary by Ed Stradling. Is it called Check, Slice and Videotape on the DVD range, that was actually very popular because I think it chimed in with the experiences of everybody of a certain age. So yeah, that's one to do. But for now, I'm concentrating on commentaries, and I'm going to do a little 19-minute session. I'm sure I will string it out. I already have done. In the company of David J Howe, who is a top fella. And, when I was collecting bootleg VHSs, probably had all of the episodes and was organising things and researching and interviewing people and writing articles and doing that excellent early groundwork, without which, Doctor Who history and Doctor Who fandom would not have the foundations. Doctor Who historical research and Doctor Who fandom would not have the foundations that it has. So I'm very delighted that David has contributed to this. I'm too behind. I was close with episode 1. I could have got episode 2, but I didn't, because I went with my gut my heart rather than with my brain, which we all make mistakes when we're choosing things, as the Doctor is about to reveal to Zoe. As the Doctor, Zoe, and the other Jamie start this episode, but they're not all going to finish it. It's episode 3 of The Mind Robber. I want you to press play if you're so inclined. I don't know if anybody is, but let's go through the motions in 3, 2, 1. So, Doctor Who theme, says the subtitles. I'm just going to turn that down a little bit. So, there we go. Here we go. It's The Mind Robber. So, it's extraordinary, isn't it, that these episodes are so short? But, that doesn't do the story any harm. It doesn't feel underdeveloped, and the plot, such as it is, couldn't really get any more complex. The plot is the plot, so it would probably only be strung out by set pieces, which a lot of the set pieces in this are very well done. But I'm not complaining about the shortness of the episodes. I actually love how simple a lot of this is. That's not even a set. It's just blackness. It's just the corner of a studio, and this unicorn on film that, of course, they then don't have to bring a horse into the studio because it's been turned into a cardboard cutout, which again, I mean, they should merchandise this. We've got various Doctor Who cardboard cutouts. Why should only character options do stuff from the classic series? Now, I think this is where the story has a little bit of a problem in the whole. Well, I don't believe it. If we say we don't believe it, it stops, and that will get quite repetitive. But I mean, it's an interesting idea. I love that close up of Troughton. He's got a great face, and here we have the Master. But of course, it's not the Master. And I remember, I'm sure was it in the program guide, or was it in the? No, I think it was in the Doctor Who archives of this in Doctor Who magazine. They credited M. Rhys Jones as the Master of the Land, so that because otherwise fans would go, in those days when information was scouted, would go, oh, it's the Master, and I think some people did have to have it clarified to them that the Master in the Mind of Evil is not the Master from I remember having to tell a young fan friend at school when it was Terror of the Vervoid. He went, so is that Travers from the Web of Fear? Because Commodore Travers was called Travers, and we did, and I was laughing with somebody else. I remember when Sarah Jane Adventures announced the new series, and it said Sarah and Mr. Smith and blah, blah, and Rani all take and of course because Rani was replacing another character, and loads of people went, oh, the Rani, what? And it's like, actually, there's a character Rose, isn't there, coming up in the specials as I record this. They have yet to be on. I think if you're not a Patreon member, they will have been on. So that's an interesting. You're living in an interesting. Well, actually, I'm loving the anticipation. And people went, oh, Rose. Well, she's replacing Billie Piper. It's Rose Tyler, rather than go, or it's somebody else with the name Rose. There's a certain strata of fandom we get so giddy about. If something has got the same name as something else, it's got to be the same one. For people who for a show that's all about difference every week and changing horizons and all that sort of thing, we do very much like things to be the same one as the one that came before. Anyway, whilst I'm being rude about people who jump to conclusions, I've missed the end of Hamish Wilson. I love his unique place in Doctor Who history of being the guy that was a regular character, but only for, and it's for 2 episodes, but only really for a week, really, wasn't it? But there he is. And Jamie is back. It's nice to have you back, Fraser. But I actually really like Hamish Wilson's performance as Jamie. I think he would have been. It's kind of like straight on with business. But I love the fact that, of course, that the Doctor got it wrong, and that's a great shot through a cobweb. Excellent cobweb work. The BBC, David Whittaker, Evan Hercules. That's a wonderful shot. I'd forgotten about that shot. That's probably not one that... no, because my bootleg was good enough quality. I'd just forgotten about that beautiful cobweb shot. I'm taken with it, and I like it. But, yes, well done, Hamish Wilson. I like you being... I like the fact that you were there. Oh, yes, and I like the fact that the Doctor got it wrong and had to admit that to Zoe. I like the Doctor being sort of flawed. Because he's got his mind on other things, and Troughton does it so well, and that sort of bolshy schoolboy stuff that he does is very winning. But it really works with Zoe because he doesn't like her being right, because she often is right, and she's not smug about it so much because she's just a creature of logic, isn't she? She's not boastful, but she's just like, no, but if I'm right, I'm right, and of course that's quite insufferable. Even though she's not actually doing anything wrong, so you want to cut her down to size, and it's quite fun that the Doctor wants to cut her down to size. But then if he's wrong, it's funny because again she's just like, but you were wrong, and that's all right to say that. I think the comic potential and the comic dynamic in that is lovely because nobody's being an arse, because it's and doubling down when you sort of know you're wrong, but you don't want to admit to it, is something that we can all identify with, and we sort of know it's naughty, and yet we do it anyway. So it's an identifiable dynamic as well, where we know the sort of joke is on that aspect of us, and our desire for Zoe to be wrong, because we don't like people who are right all the time. How dare they? It's a bit like, I was talking to somebody about Bonnie Langford the other day, and because she was not popular when she was chosen to be a Doctor Who the first time. Why? Because she could sing, she could dance, she could act, and she seemed happy. And it's like, yeah, we don't trust that. And it's like, what does that say about us? She hasn't done anything wrong. She wasn't a boastful person. She wasn't. She never had a reputation of being difficult to work with or anything like that. But she was. She was skilled and hardworking, and yeah, as I say, sort of seemed quite happy. You go, yeah, I don't like that. So isn't it nice that she's we've as a nation managed to get over that, and she is now a national treasure. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And isn't that a weird dynamic, isn't it? That somebody whose announcement for the show first time round was pretty much universally met with revulsion and annoyance, and it was a sign that the show was was making huge mistakes, and now it's like a national treasure is returning to the fold, and something that I don't think we'd even contemplated. Anyway, that's nothing to do with this story, The Mind Robber, where we're in a lovely tunnel. Troughton's face is so good. And of course, this is quite sort of Reithian, isn't it? That's the other great thing about this, is that a lot of things that I've read and done have been inspired by Doctor Who. So any sort of historical subject that I've done a deep dive into, it's partially because I want to see if the Doctor Who version. So I've read quite a lot of the truth behind the gunfight at the OK Corral, but also, there was always quite a pleasant crossover between the literature or mythology that we learnt at school and the stuff that the Doctor Who writers tended to name check or evoke or even portray. So the Minotaur that we had books about myths at home, and I did the classics at school as well, so knew about all of that. I liked the shot of the Minotaur shadow on the wall as well. That's nice. And are we going to have a sort of point of view shot? Yeah, there we go. And Jamie puts his coat over the eye of the shoulder. Oh, well, and another thing about names, people getting names right. Emrys Jones is often confused with Emrys James. Emrys James is Orcon in State of Decay. Both very different actors, but often, and I think Doctor Who magazine did it, and I think when Emrys James died, he was listed in some publications as the guy that played the Master in The Mind Robber and Orcon in State of Decay. It's a good Minotaur. We only see it for a second. I'm assuming that must have been a stock Minotaur to see it. So, and I believe there's some confusion over who plays it. In the listings I always had, it was Richard Irison, who was my former agent, who plays Axis in the next story, the Croton. So you actually see him in the flesh. He was a good actor, Richard, and he did Mr. Sparrow from the Brewery in EastEnders, and did loads of work. And was quite a recognisable TV face in the 70s and 80s, but then became an agent. But somebody, is it Alex Moore? One of the guys, Ben Jolly, one of the, or even Stephen Griffiths, one of the guys who's good with actors. We're a little sort of brains trust of note comparers on actors. Said they'd spoken to Richard and that he didn't remember it. Now that doesn't necessarily mean he didn't do it, but anyway, I've had some doubt cast on who played the Minotaur. I don't know why because I don't have any further information on that, so it's not a particularly useful contribution. Anyway, Emrys Jones playing the master of the land, it's not his first visit to the Doctor Who studio, because he was married at the time to Anne Riddler, who plays Dr. Gemma Corwin in The Wheel in Space. And I believe that for her final episode, she had, or one of the episodes, I think it was her final episode of The Wheel in Space, she wasn't very well. And so he attended rehearsals on her behalf in order to, because the show must go on, and sort of stood in for her for a couple of days. She did the performance, which obviously, I mean, I don't know if that meant that he was in the production team's mind and was cast a little bit later on, or if it's coincidence. There's enough coincidence in the acting business for that to be the case. But anyway, that's a nice little bit of trivia, isn't it? He'd sort of doubled for his wife when she had the flu, not that long before this. It's a charming performance from Bernard Horsfall, who I think is a lovely actor with a great solid presence, and I do love that idea that Gulliver can only speak the words that he's given. I think that's a fantastic application of the storyline, the story idea into the events of the episode. They're doing a lot, aren't they? With very sort of limited resources. And we're getting new sets every week as well, which is interesting. But we do have a little bit of location here. Jamie goes to Castrovalva, doesn't he? Richard Ireson is also the reason he's listed as playing the Minotaur, is because he's around, because he's playing one of the toy soldiers, and one of the toy soldiers is also Ian Hines, who is Fraser Hines' brother. Now, that's always been in Doctor Who lore, but nobody's ever interviewed Ian Hines, and I always thought that's a bit odd, because you'd get him in, wouldn't you? He's around, and so I spoke to Fraser about this, but they've lost touch. They don't. They're not in touch anymore. So Fraser doesn't even know where he is. Interestingly, families are funny things, aren't they? So that's why we've never, because you think hoik him in and stick him in front of the camera. It's an easy other contributor to a DVD extra, but no, actually Ian is somebody who's never been interviewed or spoken about Doctor Who, because getting hold with him is not as easy as one might think without knowing the details. But yes, I thought it worth asking Fraser, because I didn't know. I didn't know if he was still alive or anything, and actually, turns out nor does Fraser. And this is great. Rapunzel is another. It's like they've sort of cherry picked a lot of the sort of memorable things that that came into one's orbit at school, and I think the Rapunzel that we have, and this is very funny. Ouch. I love Christine Perry's performance as Rapunzel. And of course, we think she looks like that, but that's a wig. So I don't know what her hair was like in real life. And she's she's somebody that was never been traced or interviewed about Doctor Who. In fact, I think one of the Brains Trust, Stephen Griffiths, sort of knows where she is, but he's had no luck. And it's a shame, because I think she's got a real you would cut a son. I love that. I think that's great. But I think she gives a really sort of charming, slightly coquettish performance. And she's got a really nice energy about her. But she didn't do an awful lot after playing Rapunzel. It's such a pity you're not a prince. Go on, let him in, Rapunzel. Let him into your boudoir. But it's very charming, isn't it? I mean, there's. Oh, and she's vanished. Yeah, so I was going to say there's no danger here, but it is still quite disconcerting, isn't it? Everywhere you turn is a bit of a mystery. We know that there's this sort of menagerie of fictional characters, but we don't know why. And we know there are threats because there are the toy soldiers. The white robots have been hanging around, and there's this weird guy who we haven't seen yet, who's watching everything and saying saying enigmatic things, and that's Christine Pere's voice as well, playing the voice of the. But because no point in hiring another actor when you've got somebody there who can do it for free. But this is another turnaround again, because we've had the forest of words, we've had the spooky, gloomy tunnels with the cobwebs, and now we've got this weird place of computer banks and ticker tape. Ticker tape seems an extraordinary thing now, doesn't it? And I was thinking about, I've been listening to Hamster with a Blunt Penknife, lovely podcast, and they're talking about the seeds of death, and in that, everyone, Brent walks around with a clipboard, because we can have TMAT, we can have all futuristic things, but some things as well, we make with the things that we know that we've got. So pen and paper, whereas of course I've written loads of things today and it's been on a keyboard or on a handheld device. I haven't used a pen and paper, apart from to scribble down a number here and there every now and again. And that's probably quite old-fashioned of me. Sue Pulford, I don't think anyone's ever found her either as the Medusa. And this is a lovely bit of Ray Harryhausen type of stop motion, isn't it? The film's slightly out of phase there, isn't it? But or maybe it's just the movement. Anyway, I like it because it reminds me of the skeletons in Jason of the Argonauts. And this is quite a nice dramatic device of having Jamie reading out, what's going to happen to them, and it happening to them, because that's quite meta as well. He's reading it out like it's a story, and of course this is So we've kind of got a repeat of what happened not that long ago, of going. We know that they turn into cardboard cutouts. If you say that they don't exist, so Zoe's got to kind of go, yeah, but she's kind of touching my face, so this time I'm not going to do that thing that will obviously save us. It's a bit of a stretch, but it's okay, because I think it's pulled off very nicely. That little bit of, she's in the studio, the actress, but there's also the film to have the sort of moving snakes, and I think that's a pretty effective, for quite a sort of low key, in many ways quite sparse production, to have that sort of money shot of that special effect is a nice way to end the very short episode. This is going to be one of the shortest episodes of Happy Times and Places, I think, unless David says something that's going to provoke me to do a monologue for an hour. I mean, stranger things have happened, but let's see. Well, I have to choose first, don't I? What my thing about episode 3 is, whilst I download David's. What's my favourite thing about episode 3? Well, I can't do Hamish Wilson really, because we kind of covered the new Jamie last time, and we sort of lose him this time. I suppose it might be because I kind of forewarned is forearmed. Well, I'm sure when we do the Crotons, I'll choose the bit where the doctor gets it, really flunks the test, and so he passes it, does really well. But I do like that dynamic that the doctor's got the face wrong, and so he sort of takes the mickey, and he has to go. Whoa. I do like that dynamic between them, and I do like the fact that Jamie's face is wrong because of the doctor's mistake. Because because you could do that without it ever. Troughton has the skill to do that without it actually undermining the character of the Doctor. It somehow, because he exudes sort of intelligence and gravitas, it never makes the Doctor seem like a fool. I don't know quite how that works. He's this sort of childish improviser klutz who nonetheless always has a sort of deep searing intelligence at the back of it all, so he can sort of have his cake and eat it. I do like that. I admire the special effect of the Medusa. I love the idea of Gulliver only being able to say lines from the... And in fact, when I read about that, I think Peter Ling maybe said it in an interview, and it was before I'd seen the story. I remember thinking, that's a damn good idea. Actually, that makes this story that seems to be quite a weird sort of comic book, sort of sort of episodic recruitment of characters from kids literature, mostly kids literature even. And I know the Greek myths aren't kids literature, but it's still stuff that you're introduced to at school level. None of the characters in Land of Fiction there's nobody from a James Ellroy novel. I know he wasn't writing in 1968 or whatever, but there's nobody, George. There's no George Smiley. It's all sort of fairy tale myths, comic. It's all stuff that is quite kid friendly. The fiction, because strictly speaking, for the Land of Fiction, you could have anybody, couldn't you? You could have the woman from Deep Throat. That's not true. I mean, again, you wouldn't, because it's Doctor Who. But you could have the guy from American Psycho. And I know I'm invoking things that it would be the Land of Fiction and prescience. But it is all sort of kiddie literature stuff. And so I just remember thinking how clever it was, and I like the detail, and I like the fact that the writer had that knowledge, or at least went to that correct amount of effort. And I know, as I say, since I think Doctor Who magazine in an article, I'm pretty sure went through which lines were actually from Gulliver's Travels and which are a sort of mixture, or which have had a word added here or there. But nonetheless, that's fine. I mean, you're only going to know that if you go back and study the text in detail and go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And if you do that, I think you kind of deserve to be disappointed. I mean, I'm glad Doctor Who magazine did that. I was right to do it. I was in an illustrative and intelligent, an article, an informative article, which is absolutely fine. But if you did it just, if you were to do it just to try and catch the writer out, I think you deserve, in the same way that anybody that, although somebody did give me a different point of view to this, but when people sit, when you're doing a Shakespeare play and they sit in the front row, with a finger on the text going through it, you kind of go, oh, come on, well, you had to catch me out. But actually, that might be an intellectual exercise where somebody's, or it might be an aid for somebody that has issues with hearing or concentration or whatever. So one shouldn't be too judgmental. But if you've just gone with the text in order to, catch the actors out, or go home thinking, well, I think you'll find about Act 4, Scene 2 or whatever, then again, you deserve to do what happened when we were doing Midsummer Night's Dream at the Royal Exchange, and my friend Francis McGee, who was playing Peter Quince, and we were all the rude mechanicals, when we came on to do our play within the play, he jumped off. We all came on in a van. He jumped out the back of the van, and we'd all spotted this person following the text, and he went into the audience and he grabbed it and he threw it. Anything went when we were doing that show. It was great. Anyway, so is it that and with due reverence to the special effect as well, which I think for the time is a handy piece of kit, and a lot of effort's gone into that, and is reminiscent of those Harryhausen films that again were such an important part of my childhood, and of course very cinematic, and Troughton is in Jason of the Argonauts of course as well, but cinematic. But of course when I watched Jason of the Argonauts, I didn't know that was Patrick Troughton. I think, and he's in one of the Sinbad ones as well. And it was only afterwards, and when I saw a picture of him, my brother pointed out something. I was like, oh God, wow, that was Patrick Straw, because he had a good career, didn't he? Movies, but always turning up in stuff that seemed pretty cool as well. Jason and the Argonauts, Sinbad, and Tom Baker's in a Sinbad too. As is Caroline Munro, who of course was going to be in Doctor Who the movie at one point. God, that's another story. Anyway, I did meet her. So yeah, the Harryhausen snake head of the Medusa is pretty cool, and I like the Medusa being in it because, and as I think I started saying it, there is a Rethian element. It's sort of it encourages kids to, have renewed vigor when they go back to school to study those things, or when those things are brought up in school, they're like, oh, that's cool because that was in Doctor Who. If you're prone to be inspired by Doctor Who to then check out all the things that are in Doctor Who, and I think a lot of us do that, then it's serving a greater purpose, even beyond the entertainment value, and also the fact that this story is so bold to be so different. But I think I've got to go, just because I was so impressed when I first read it. It does make for Gulliver's contribution to be actually rather charming. Bernard Horsfall's great. But it's also, a clue to the story for the Doctor, and a clue to how to deal with the various fictional elements and what some of their limitations might be. They can only do, what they do within the literature that they exist in, because Gulliver can only do what he does in the pages of those books, because that's all he is, and that's what makes us different from fictional characters, is that we're not limited by what we are prescribed to be by, our creator, if you like. Although, if you are religious, then actually we could be, and that makes for quite an interesting philosophical debate, doesn't it? But anyway, that's not, that's digging quite deep, isn't it? That's extrapolating beyond what anybody who was making this story back then would ever have considered to be reasonable attention to give to this, frivolous adventure in which our time travellers, scamper about getting involved with fairy tales and robots. But yes, Gulliver only saying the lines that Gulliver is given in Gulliver's Travels, I think, is a wonderful idea, and it's weaved into it's woven into the story artfully, and I think it's a really neat idea, and I think it's an idea that kids would really latch onto and enjoy, because I know I did when I first read about it when I was much younger, and I remember thinking how terribly clever that was. And it's a beautiful idea. What's David going to choose? He's on an exercise bike in his video. Lots of fields behind him. And more cat. They've got a lot of things that cats can climb up and scratch in their house, which is very wise if you have cats, because they do like scratching things.
So episode 3 of The Mind Robber has got a great sequence in it where Jamie and Zoe and the Doctor are going through a labyrinth to try and find the centre of the labyrinth. And of course there's a Minotaur in there, and Medusa and all sorts of stuff. And I just love the labyrinth. I think for obviously not very much money, they've put together spider webs and walls, and it looks great, and the sound effects are great, dripping water. So Mind Robber, the labyrinth, that's my choice.
Well, you keep peddling away there, David. That is a good choice. It's a shame that the sound effects are always slightly compromised for me on these viewings, because, of course, I have to gab on all the way through, lest you get bestowed a silence. And the only thing worse than having to listen to me bang on, presumably, is to have nothing coming into your ears, because you have your headphones in for a reason. So yes, and you've evoked that very nicely, David, and I think particularly you've hit upon one of the really charming aspects of it, is that it's pieced together in not very much studio space at all. And again, Evan Hercules in his only, and again, I'm saluting the name. Can you imagine? It'd be a great name for. Please welcome onto the stage your next act for the evening. It's Evan Hercules. I wish I'd thought to change my name, because Toby Haydock, Evan Hercules. I mean, it's not too dissimilar, except that mine isn't particularly exciting, and everybody gets it wrong. But Evan Hercules does a good job, and I love the cobwebs are all fantastic, and then that cobweb that they shoot through when they come in is a wonderful sort of symbiosis of the designer's art and the director's art of how to make it visually interesting, but also evocative. Cobwebs again sort of evoke the kind of mysterious literature that abounded when I was a kid, and it's very much one of those sort of simple devices to be a bit creepy and be a bit spooky, and also be visually interesting. And it's a nice prop as well, because it looks it's obviously a fake, but it looks really good. It looks really decent. I could have just chosen that shot of the cobweb, which is not one I'd remembered, and it's odd because I've seen this story a lot. It's not like this is a story that is totally alien to me, although I haven't watched it for a very long time. But I love that shot of the cobweb, and yes, David is right to celebrate that labyrinth, those tunnels. They are very evocative. They are very nicely shot, but mostly, they are very economically placed and constructed and devised, and they really do their job within the story. But I chose the Gulliver bit. I don't mind choosing that either. Maybe I should have chosen that as my favorite, as my bonus thing about the whole story. But I could have got there with you, David, but I didn't. I went in a different direction, which is, I suppose, appropriate. We both went. We were both in the labyrinth, but we both went off in different directions. Now I'm going to go in yet another direction, up to bed. But I thought before I did so, I would complete another little sojourn into the land of fiction. So I'm going to go to sleep, and the next cobwebs I come across will be those I will be rubbing from my eyes come the morning. So if wherever you are, I hope you have a lovely snooze, or a lovely rest of the day, or a lovely time at the gym, or a lovely time doing the garden, making your lunch, whatever it is you do when you listen to this. I'm baffled that so many of you do. Extremely flattered, like the like the unicorn and everything else that turns out not to be real. But yeah, flattered that you do, and very grateful indeed. So come back next time, and we haven't actually seen. 3 episodes in, we haven't seen the master Emrys J. Jones's face yet. So you'd be there going, come on, I need something for my show reel. You didn't have those things in those days, but presumably we get to see him in all his glory next time. Yeah, we do, presumably. I know we do. And I'm already looking forward to seeing how this story develops, because it's got to do. Yeah, I know there are some treats in store, and I've got to see how much it is dominated by it's that, yes, but we don't believe in it, do we? Oh no, we don't. Which is sometimes, when I think about this story, my one of my big takeaways from it, and I don't want that to be, because I think it has so much more that it's offering. So let's reconvene next time, and see what's written in the pages of the book of The Mind Robber. But until then, happy times and places to you all. Well, welcome everybody. It's time to venture once again into the land of fiction as the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton, and his companions Jamie and Zoe wrangle with characters who are made up and don't exist in the real world, which of course they in real life don't do either. But isn't that a wonderful notion? I'm enthused because I've just been talking to Stephen Szupanski from Radio Free Skaro about Quatermass, about which I rabbit on quite a lot, as has been noted. And it's enthused me to get back to talking about something I like rabbiting on about even more, which is Doctor Who. Now, that Radio Free Skaro podcast, if you are a patron, will be out in the future. It will be out on Sunday. If you are a non-patron, it's long in the past, probably about 6 months ago. And that's pretty much the only difference between patronage and not, is the wait between episodes. But actually, there are advantages to being a non-patron in this regard, because patrons have had to wait quite a long time between episodes 3 and 4 of The Mind Robber, because I've been swanning about doing things. And non-patrons, because your stuff is released to a sensible schedule where things are all grouped together because they're all well in the can, whereas patrons get these sort of as they're done, really. I mean, it's almost live, this, my goodness. I mean, it's actually due out as I'm recording this. It should be going up on the Patreon feed now. It's obviously not going to because it doesn't exist yet. I deny its reality. It's currently a cardboard cutout of itself. Yes, so non-patrons, you will hear this episode 4 of The Mind Robber, just a short number of days after you've heard episode 3, as the schedule goes. I, on the other hand, haven't watched The Mind Robber for a while. It's been a good couple of weeks, I should think. So I hope I don't repeat myself as we go once more into the land of fiction, in the company of David J Howe, one of the major figures in Doctor Who research from yesteryear. He's an expert on all sorts of different aspects of the history of Doctor Who, and particularly toys as well, which has never been an area of my particular interest. I'm much more about what went on screen and behind the scenes and in the development of the stories themselves. But David was there in the early years, showing what fans could do to chronicle and support and understand their programme. And it's been a great pleasure to get to know him over the years. I only really see him at conventions, or occasionally if I'm doing a thing with Fraser Hines, with whom he is great friends and has been a neighbour indeed. And they're thick as thieves. So where there is a Fraser, there is often a David, and what a joy it is to see both men, because I enjoy the company of both. So I'm very grateful that David has gone to the effort to put nice videos together for this, for his contribution, and to if he lends his name to any Doctor Who project, it adds to its lustre, if indeed this has any lustre at all. And if it has no lustre, well, it has some now, thanks to David. So let's see how lustrous we can get as we see what is going on in the land of make-believe. It really is, isn't it? Oh, if only I could break copyright music and I could have that song by those people. You know the one I mean. The land of fun in the sun, number one. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Oh, right. That my telly screen has just... it was on a screensaver on BritBox, and it's just as I started singing, it faded to black, as if to say, yeah, no, come on, you've been too long. Now I can't get it back. All right, here it is. So, I won't be singing again. Let's go to the land of make-believe, but without a musical accompaniment, as we watch Part 4, Episode 4 of The Mind Robber. And I am going to press play in 3, 2, 1. This is going to be a short episode again, isn't it? Because that's the case with The Mind Robber. Everything comes in a little bit short. So if this is an episode that has a short running time, I can't guarantee that. I might bang on way too much at the end. And it's always a dilemma, that, because you think, oh well, people get more value if the podcast is longer, not if it's longer because it's full of rubbish. So I have, if I do augment this with extra parlay, I hope it is of a reasonable and entertaining quality. It's episode 4. It's interesting. It says part 4 on BritBox. When we did Running Through Corridors, we deliberately called each episode either part 1, episode 1, or, as in the case of the Ice Warriors, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then Lars, the publisher, didn't realise that and just universalised them all and changed them. And but this is episode, and it's 4 as in the number 4, not FOUR. And I'm sure there's something to be written on the differences between when it's episode, when it's part, when it's a numeral, when it's written. In fact, that's just given me idea for a very potentially very anal and tedious and boring, but you never know, it could throw up some interesting observations or even the odd joke or two, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. It's so yes, so he's picked up the sword, which has come from nowhere, because they've given it this sort of extra dimension of going, well, if he does the obvious thing, which is to slay the monster, he becomes part of the fiction, and that is what the trap is. And that's quite a nice and abstract idea, and it's good. And that's actually an excellent shot of the Medusa in the mirror. And this is quite Reithian, isn't it? It's quite educational. I'd done the sort of the myths and legends at school, so this was all quite familiar. So actually, the Medusa wasn't quite how I'd imagined her, and I think I'd got a myths and legends book where she had the sort of snakes on her hair, but she had a more human face than that, and was more like a sort of screaming banshee type. But of course, it's a wonderful image. Those myths and legends have, the Cyclops, the one-eyed beast, and I remember seeing a wonderful picture of the Cyclops in a monsters book I had. In fact, it's the monsters book that I've just talked to Stephen Shapansky about at Radio Free Skaro, that had pictures from Doctor Who. It's called The A to Z of Monsters. It's nothing to do with the Mind Robber, so I won't go into much detail, but it did have a picture of the Cyclops, which is another sort of myths and legends creature. And there's all sorts of wonderful paintings and etchings of those sorts of creatures. So I'm surprised that I suppose the Minotaur has been used in a sci-fi version, the Horns of Nimon, of course. But the myths and legends of various monstrous creatures that are could be great inspiration for Doctor Who. And I'm surprised the Medusa is really only manifested itself once, really. Because the Minotaur, of course, is also a version of in the God Complex. Now this is that's lovely. The sort of the sliding door, and the sort of the little hatch escapes, and I love that Gulliver sort of is brave and decides that he's gonna protect. His instinct is to be protective of Jamie, which shows that Gulliver is, he's one of the sort of goody sidekicks in this, even though he's slightly detached and speaks in the third person occasionally and talks like the pages of a book. And also we've got that thing of that he can't see the white robots that Bernard Horsfall does very well. But Bernard Horsfall has a very benign quality about him, doesn't he? It's a lovely, sweet performance, and the first of his many forays into Doctor Who. And what a great servant he was to the show, and indeed to David Maloney, who casts him every time. Every time Bernard Horsfall is in Doctor Who, he is cast by David Maloney. And I believe he'd got his tickets for Gallifrey, hadn't he? I think he'd even changed his money for Gallifrey when he was a crofter working in the Isle of Skye. That's what he did to retire. His wife, actually, the actress Jean Jordan Rogers, has only recently passed away, but he was all set for Gallifrey when he passed away. Bernard Horsfall, a lovely actor. I never had the pleasure. Here is the carcass. I was talking to somebody recently about Christopher Robbie, because who this is, also known as the cyber leader in Revenge of the Cybermen. So he has a silly German accent in this. and in Revenge of the Cybermen, and it was darling Matt Evenden who said, so no, it wasn't. It might have actually been Pete McTighe actually, who was saying, so is the Revenge Cyberman, is he an American actor? I said, no, he's putting on an accent because that's what he thinks sci-fi aliens should be, is American. He is actually very. He talks like this, Christopher. He was a continuity announcer on Southern Television, and I've seen him do Shakespeare. He was the Curran to the King Lear of Robert Stevens at the Royal Shakespeare Company when Stevens played King Lear, and in fact Stevens was ill for press week, and so his understudy Christopher Robbie, who was playing the one scene Curran, which isn't much of a part, was King Lear, and my girlfriend at the time saw him and said that he had tears in his eyes at the curtain call because he did a fantastic job. This is a very bad fight. Yeah, oh, that was very, very bad. Arranged by B.H. Barry, who also arranges the fights in Four to Doomsday, and so I would argue, does not Doctor Who is not the greatest showcase for the fight arranging skills of B.H. Barry, who is a very experienced and regarded fight director, but I would perhaps not have either of his Doctor Who's on my show reel. And poor old Wendy Padbury has to sort of do that thing where she's explaining how she's beating him because she's remembering these moves, so she's sort of saying what the moves are, which she's going to explain to Doctor Who now. Maybe she's not. But she has to do that whilst doing the sort of flicking him, and he has to then time his tumbles to the flicking that she does, and he doesn't. But yes, so Christopher Robbie had his moment playing King Lear for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and has also played the Carcass and the terrible cyber leader in Revenge of the Cybermen. It's an interesting life, the life of an actor. But Christopher himself, who is now a sort of bewhiskered, sort of Captain Burnseye, Uncle Albert type in aspect, is a lovely, lovely man, a very jolly fellow, a very actory actor, and whose company I very much like. But both of his Doctor Who performances are quite eccentric, I would say. But it's introduced another sort of level into the story, and it's sort of meant to be quite comedic anyway. The Carcass, this, with his fake rubbery muscle chest and all of that, and introduces a fictional character that the Doctor doesn't know, because the Doctor's sort of understanding of fiction is what actually any sort of schoolboy or girl of 1967, 68, what their understanding of literature would be. Of course, they're not going to know anything from the future, because future great literature hasn't been invented yet. There's no characters from the Zadie Smith novel in this. I mean, I don't think there would be the equivalent anyway, but there's nobody from Harry Potter in this, which is, of course, if maybe it was made in 2068, 67, 68, it would be. So, or maybe not, but you get what I mean. There's it's the thing about Doctor Who travelling in the future and the past, of course, is that the future of the programme, the future when the programme is being made, can of course make a fool of the programme, because it can only predict the future. But if it continues to exist 20 years in the future, there will be future developments that, of course, it won't have been able to predict. And in this case, there would be future works of literature that, of course, can't be plundered by the programme because they haven't happened yet. The Master, of course, this has caused lots of confusion. The fact that the baddie is called the Master, but it's not actually the Master. It's not that long away from the Master appearing in Doctor Who and becoming the Master that we know and love to hate. I love it when Troughton is sort of gentle and sort of sweetly. It's sort of slightly patronising. He talks in a sort of childish manner, but it's so benign and so disarming and so sweet. He's like a sort of gentle uncle. Yeah, I love that. Good for you, Doctor Who. I love Patrick Troughton. He's such an interesting actor, and I love his sort of scruffy uncle aspect that he has. Ticker tape, ticker tape. We wouldn't have that now either. So it's unique, really. This, isn't it, in the history of Doctor Who, this story. And here we are in a sort of in a set that's a mixture of, sort of sci-fi propery with the ticker tape machine, but it's also got that Zoe's going to be silly now, Zoe, that was silly, but it's also got the sliding door that Jamie hides away from, and you get the feeling that that anything can happen in this world. You go out of one set and you end up in a completely different environment, and it's a place of falling through walls and into tunnels, and from futuristic sort of high-tech environments into older ones or fairy tale ones. And I like what it does with place. I think that's really, even though it does feel quite low budget, that kind of fits in with the world that we've been created, because it's a world made up of sort of fiction, and it could almost stand a sort of cross arch or a painted backdrop, because that would add to its fairy tale like qualities. And the fact that the world has been made out of sort of cheap fictional backdrops, it kind of all works. And the fact that you have this, we expect a set to have, through a door you could see what is behind the door, but here it actually just has a black drape, and that adds to the sort of mystery that they're walking from one environment and sort of almost really weirdly materialize into another, that the normal rules don't apply in this world, because it's one of it's counterfeit. It's a land of fiction, even in its sort of structure. So they've gone off one place, and the way that the camera starts close up on them and sort of pulls away, as if to say you've now sort of almost been transported by magic, into a different. They went through the door, but actually, then the new environment sort of materialized around them. I think that's very cleverly done with the way that Maloney shoots it, especially shooting through the door. So this is actually the first time we've seen the Master, and he, a bit like the Great Intelligence, he's been speaking in a sort of scary voice, but then when he's having discourse with them, he's now his old self. He's now the sort of genial schoolmasterish Emrys Jonesian, the guy that he is. He's not the spokesperson for the machine here, and it is a bit like the Great Intelligence, where the actor speaks in a different voice depending on whether he is under the thrall of the thing that is controlling him. Emrys Jones, see, that mistake is made. That mistake is even made on the credits, I think, of the Out of the Unknown reconstruction of the episode called Little Black Bag, which only half of exists, and the closing credits, the last shot, don't exist. So they've sort of pieced them together, and I think when they remade the credits, they made the mistake of calling him Emrys James, who is the actor who plays Orcon in State of Decay, and not Emrys Jones, who is this actor, who was married to Anne Riddler, I mentioned before, who was in The Wheel in Space. So he has been on the set of Doctor Who not that long ago, and actually he's one of those actors that, looking at him here, he's not got an awful lot of time left. He dies, I think, in 1972. I think somewhere early, out when touring a play. I think he's playing Winston Churchill in Johannesburg, I think, and collapses and has a heart attack. And in fact, one of the newspaper reports I read said, that they're looking to contact his family, and you think, what? So it's been run in the newspaper before his wife knows. Because that's the way that information was disseminated in those days. Now, I always get distracted by Emrys Jones in this episode, because he's got a bit of spittle in the corner of his mouth, which now remains with him for the rest of the show this week. I love his little fingerless mittens. Well, they're not mittens, are they? Mittens are ones where all the fingers are knitted together. His fingerless gloves, I like them. It gives him a sort of benign eccentricity. He's like a Jamie. I love the way that Fraser Hines sort of fronts out and goes, "Oh, we're listening to you," as they sort of shift away. It's a lovely little piece of acting that I love. Jamie and Zoe, I think they're great, and they're going to go and be pesky, which is great. But I love the way that Fraser does that. Sort of, oh yeah, I'm listening to you, I'm just going to shuffle off to this side. The master brain is not unlike the conscience of Marinus in aspect, is it? I love this. Again, the fact that these are sort of flats, and they're flats of sort of photographs of bookcases, again, doesn't really matter. It kind of adds to it. They are scenery, and that kind of works as going, they are a fictional representation of what they are, supposed to be. I think you could be wonderfully meta with this, and it really works. I do like the big sort of spinning brain computery thing there. I remember Doctor Who: A Celebration does an unusual thing in its write up of this story, going, one thing is left unresolved: who built the computer? And when you didn't have the stories to watch, it was like, oh, is that mentioned in the story? No, it was just the writer. It was just Jeremy Bentham. It was his concern about the story. But he doesn't do that in his write-ups for other stories, going, there are holes in the plot like this one. But that was obviously one that had bothered him to the extent that he put it in the write-up. And the write-up in Doctor Who: A Celebration was, just a brief summary of a plot and then a couple of little behind-the-scenes facts. But it was interesting that was the thing that was particularly troubling him. And so I remember, watching it going, oh, are they going to raise the thing of who built the computer? Oh no, it's just an element that was left hanging for Jeremy Bentham. And of course, Out of the Unknown, mentioned that Emery Jones is in an episode of, also had the White Robot. So this is one that is quite closely related to that science fiction anthology series, which, if you've never seen, is definitely worth checking out for Doctor Who actors and Doctor Who directors, and looking at sci-fi that is perhaps sort of slightly more adult in intent, but actually sometimes seems a bit obscure and impenetrable, and Doctor Who is largely, I think, much more fun. It's because Doctor Who has to be accessible family tea time viewing, which means that it's always got sort of accessibility in its remit, and as I say, as I feel, always has a sort of a zest to it, and with this, is really playing with form and doing something very ambitious with a show that the previous year has been quite formulaic. Actually, still this production block, isn't it? Because this is the end of this production block. Patrick Troughton is knackered at this point, which is why these episodes are short, and they're still in the same production block as season 5. I think this is an absolutely glorious image. Jamie and Zoe trapped in the pages of a book. It's surreal, it's strange, it's haunting. It's a really brilliant abstract cliffhanger that is nonetheless a terrifying image. Never mind Doctor's head being held underwater or a monster bursting through a door. The two companions trapped in the pages of a book. What a wonderful thing! What a great thing to do when you go, well, let's do this story in the land of fiction. How can the threats manifest themselves? So we don't know really, and there's no way they can do what they've done with the previous episode endings, which is have them go, you're just a fictional character, I can overcome you in that way, which is what they've done to previous ones, and it was in danger of being a little bit repetitive. That sees Jamie, and I remember reading about that in the Doctor Who magazine episode guide. It said Jamie and Zoe are shut into the pages of a book, and thinking, oh god, that sounds really amazing, and imagining what it must have been like. And I have to say, that's one of the rare occasions where what I imagined was actually not unlike how it is realised, because it's a giant book and they're shut into the pages of it. It's a brilliant image, it's a brilliant idea, it's brilliantly realised, and I think might very well be my favourite thing of the episode. Let's think of some other things. I like the way that Gulliver decides to protect Jamie. I think that's sweet, and I think that adds a nice dimension to his character. I like the way that they're sort of magically transported. That the sets, have that slightly deliberately, or perhaps I'm being kind, but that slightly deliberately two-dimensional hokey feel, and the simplicity of the black backdrops. Well, I'll tell you what it does. If it is done on the cheap, because they have no choice, it's a story and a conceit and an idea and a conception that makes a virtue of the cheapness with which this stuff will be done, and it really, really works. And I think Evan Hercules, the designer, does a wonderful job in making cheap sets become an advantage, or if not to become an advantage, to augment the story in the correct way. And the way that David Maloney shoots it, I thought it was so clever how he shut the door behind them and then pulled out from a close-up of their faces. So I like that idea that place is as strange and is as displaced as reality, that the rules of this land are not quite the same as the one that that the reality is in, which is the same as when you're reading a book. You do transport from place to place, and you do go out of one door and then enter through a completely different one. That's how it works. So I really like that aspect of it, which is slightly intangible and slightly strange. I like the fact that we see Emrys James, and again, having had Jones. I'm doing it. If this was an article and somebody had done that, I would be furious with them. And I've done it about a gazillion times. He's Jones the Master. Jones the Master. And the fact that he's been this sort of cowled figure that we've only seen from the back, talking in this threatening computer way, and then when we see him, he's like, "Oh, hello, I'm a very benign sort of fellow with a sort of lisp, and the fact that I've got this lisp means that a little bit of spittle is going to form in the corner of my mouth, and I'm not going to notice, and the stage manager's not going to come up to me between scenes with a hanky." I thought Troughton would have used his pockets for him, dabbed him when they cut away to Jamie and Zoe or whatever. But that's one of the beautiful things of as live television. And, why wouldn't a man under the thrall of a supercomputer who's controlling a land of fiction, when he's chatting away, not realise that he's got spittle in his mouth? His flies might be undone as well. It's just we don't get a close-up of those. I look forward to the day when we have a Doctor Who villain whose flies are undone. No, I'm not sure I do. In fact, I think we can defer that and not have a flying low Doctor Who villain until I am no longer around to be disturbed by such things. But that would mean they're still making Doctor Who after I'm dead. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that. But then that means I'd witness the end of Doctor Who. Oh, what a dilemma. What would you rather, listener? Would you rather Doctor Who finished forever so that you were not denied the possibility of seeing an episode of Doctor Who that was brilliant that you didn't get to see because you died? Or would you want to see every single episode of Doctor Who, but that means therefore witness the end and the cessation of Doctor Who in production? That's a dilemma, isn't it? I think I'm quite selfish and go, no, I want to see all of Doctor Who, please. Because, imagine, Attack of the Wing-Wangs might be the best episode ever, but if it's shown the year after I'm dead, it may as well not exist. Screw you lot. Anyway, should we not talk about my death? I brought it up, sorry. I hope I'm here for a long time yet. Well, I suppose, it's possible that this will be listened. Let's not. Why am I contemplating my mortality? I suppose that's better than contemplating whether I'm actually real or a work of fiction. Are we all workers of fiction? Do we just exist in the mind of somebody else? No, I think we're real. But I do love this whole idea of a land where fiction exists. It's so batshit, it's so off the wall, so crazy. It sort of shouldn't work, and it's almost quite twee in a way in some aspects of it. But it works because it's strange and it's weird and it commits itself to it. And I also think it's rather charming. So there's lots of ways that a story of this kind could not work, and I actually think it really does. But I think I have to choose as my favourite thing before I jump over to David. I have to choose that cliffhanger. I think I sometimes think it's a bit boring and obvious to choose a cliffhanger, because cliffhangers are obviously often designed to be the most memorable part of the episode, because they're the bit that make you want to come back next week, and so they have the advantage of not even having to, progress plot or character, because they're a moment that by its very nature has to be shocking and has to be memorable and can be visual, but can sort of almost exist in a vacuum. And I know Jamie and Zoe have been fictionalized a bit for next week, but you could see it as just a sort of moment of jeopardy that has come out of nowhere. They go and escape, and it's like, well, yeah, it's because we need to get to a cliffhanger, and we'll have this bit and we'll resolve it fairly quickly next time. But it's such a good visual. It's such a bold idea. It's really, really well done. I actually think David Maloney fades to back a little bit too slowly. There's no sense of sort of crashing urgency about his cliffhangers in the Troughton era. It is like actually closing the chapter of a book, rather than sort of tearing you out, tearing you from the end of a paragraph. It's sort of like it has stopped and it has faded, and here is the music. Which I do think robs some of the cliffhangers of their sense of urgency. But in this case, again, it kind of works with the sort of fictional, we're closing the pages on this chapter. But that's me being generous, because I do think I do yearn for them to get a bit of a shift on when you're racing to the climax. But I suppose of all of his 3 stories in this season, the Crotons and the War Games, the Mind Robber is the one where it kind of gets away with it the most. But I do think the cliffhangers work better when they're not a sort of fade to black and a start, but rather when the credits and the music sort of crash into the end of the program itself. That I think makes for a more arresting cliffhanger. And yet I love this cliffhanger for different reasons. So you can not necessarily approve of the way that something is done and prefer it to be generally done another way, and yet still go but within its own terms. This is a fine example, and I just do love that image. You could only really get away with that image in a story like this. It's a simple trick. Obviously, you don't see one side of the interior of the book, and that's where the actors can fit in. There's obviously a hole there in the pages, so they're not really being squashed, but it looks like they're being squashed. They act it very well. It's filmed from the correct angle. It's a nice prop. It's a nice set. It's a wonderful idea. It's a brilliant moment. It's a brilliant visual. My choice, and I do think it's sometimes cheating, choosing the cliffhanger, and I'm sorry about that, but it has to be my favourite thing. My choice of the cliffhanger to episode 4 of The Mind Robber, my choice of my favourite thing in episode 4 of The Mind Robber is the cliffhanger. Let's see what David J Howe chooses. Oh, he's wearing an army helmet, or is it with goggles? He's reading Mind Game by David J Howe, so I'm going to allow him to plug that by describing it. This is the alt text, and he's by a bookcase with looks like a couple of awards, a few awards. So well done, David, for those awards and a medal and lots of books. And the book of Mind Game by David J Howe. And in reading it, does that mean it becomes part of the fiction? Let's see what he chooses as his thing for episode 4.
Episode 4 of The Mind Robber, and the best thing about this episode is that Zoe has this incredible fight with a carcass. Now, the carcass is this superhero from the year 2000, and he's like about 6 foot tall, more than that, played by Christopher Robbie, great guy, muscles everywhere. And little Zoe who's like 4 foot nothing if she's a day, she manages to throw him all over the set and she beats him up. It's absolutely brilliant. Genius piece of direction. Really nicely done. Absolutely love it. It's a really nice little sequence in that episode. So that's my favourite bit of episode 4.
Now that's interesting, because I have learned a lesson there, because as soon as he said that, it made me think very fondly of that fight, because of course Zoe is diminutive, the carcass is very tall. I'd got my eyes so much on, and I remember being really almost embarrassed by it when I watched this when I was much younger. I wasn't embarrassed by it this time, but I did acknowledge it's not the best fight in the world. It's not particularly well staged, and that sort of made me not enjoy that bit, and not really enjoy the carcass even though he's supposed to be quite silly and absurd. He's got a ridiculous German accent, but actually seeing it now through David's eyes, or having it explained by David, of course it's fun. It's a wheeze. Lighten up, Toby. And actually the fact that it's not very well done doesn't really matter, and kind of adds to its charm. Now I sometimes reject that. I don't go, I'm not one of those, Doctor Who's so naff it's good. I think Doctor Who's generally good because it's good, but actually within the dynamic of what they're trying to achieve within the scene, that's, the fact that it's a bit naff is not taking anything away from the program makers there, because it sort of tonally fits in with what they're trying to achieve, which is that the carcass is a bit stupid, and there's this big difference between the height and his, and isn't it her height and his, and isn't it witty that the small character defeats the big tall strapping character, and does so in a way that's rather silly and rather fun, and that takes the scene from being, as it had been in younger me's eyes, of being a bit clunky and a bit embarrassing, something to be slightly ashamed of, into being rather a fun wheeze that's rather charmingly done, and makes a virtues of even the bits that it doesn't quite get right. But it is a great idea of having Zoe, and I like the fact that Zoe continually sort of undermines what we expect her to do. She's continually, as the companion figure, actually smarter than the Doctor. She there, physically she should be, overcome, looking at the two of them, by the carcass, but actually has the smarts to outwit him because she knows these clever moves. It does make up for the fact that she rather stupidly walks through the alarm later, which is not her finest hour. But I do like Zoe, and I do like it when they play with what the conception of what the companion should be. And she manages to be sort of game and fun and slightly annoying at the same time, and you actually quite enjoy the fact that she's quite annoying, because that's sort of deliberate. It's not that she's being annoying without meaning to be. They absolutely know that she's quite irritating, and that's quite fun, unlike some characters who are irritating and they don't mean them to be. I think sometimes when they try and make Adric witty or charming, or mixing things up a bit, he's actually just a bit annoying, and they've not quite understood what the signal they're sending out is not the one that is being received, shall we say. Whereas with Zoe, it's all entirely deliberate. So that's a good choice, David, and one that I wouldn't have made in a million years, but as soon as you started making it, it made absolute sense to me, and it's made me reframe my appreciation of a particular sequence that, as I say, in the past has caused me great embarrassment, and now I see it for what it was intended to be, and not for what my teenage self wanted it to be, which was everything to be terribly serious all the time. And it is quite nice getting older and going, actually some things it's fine if they're not serious. It's absolutely fine not to be serious. Lighten up, younger Toby. Serious does not always mean good. So I don't get the point for that. But it's so long ago, I don't even remember how I'm doing with the points. I'm assuming I'm doing really, really badly. But I'm not going to join in with what the points are, because otherwise that might make me actually become a podcast instead of a real person. Isn't that how it works? So anyway, that was fun to do. I enjoyed revisiting a story that's going at a lick of a pace and is disorienting and charming and winning and inventive and strange, and not like any other Doctor Who story. and yet it's an experiment that is pulled off. I think there's no compromise really with. Sometimes Doctor Who pushes the boat out, and you go, well, it's only a sort of qualified success. I think the Mind Robber succeeds, on its own terms very, very strongly, and I'm enjoying watching it, and I hope you're enjoying listening to it. But we're going to close the pages of this particular book, so try not to get trapped on your way out, and I will speak to you next time. Ta-ta. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to this final instalment, not of Happy Times and Places. There's a few stories to go yet, but of the Happy Times and Places concerning one of Doctor Who's strangest five-parters. I mean, one of Doctor Who's only 3 five-parters, but one of Doctor Who's strangest stories, full stop. The Mind Robber. One of the sort of 2 that were considered surreal from the 60s roster of stories. The Celestial Toymaker and the Mind Robber have always been kind of sort of labelled together, thrown in together as the 2 sort of surreal sisters of the 60s. And I suppose Warriors of the Gate is a bit weird, isn't it? But nothing really goes for the sort of, because Celestial Toymaker has toys coming to life. The Mind Robber has characters from books coming to life. It's sort of about sort of, that it's deliberately pointing to the unreality and the childhood basis of the threats or the guest characters or whatever in a way that no other story really does, let alone not just from the 60s, but from the classic series, full stop. And it's, could you do something like that today? Well, as I record this, Neil Patrick Harris is playing a character who looks like he might exist on the realms of fantasy and reality. But it's a tough call, especially as Doctor Who is a show that, is often gets opened up for criticism, or, is easy to point at the ridiculousness of it. So if you deliberately sort of up the fictional content, those who are disposed so to do might go, well, it's just got silly now. But of course, everybody knows the potential to have talking toys or talking fictional characters is silly. I mean, they're aware of that, and they've gone for it anyway. So I think that almost defeats the argument being made before it is made. Yeah, they're toying with the idea of what is it. They're really, they're really tottering on a line here, and deliberately so, and they should be applauded for that. And I think it's more successful here in the Mind Robber than in Toymaker. Where Toymaker, I think the idea is great, but in execution, well, anyway, let's see what happens when I have to be positive about Toymaker, which I do have an illustrious guest who is a staunch advocate of the story. It's their favourite story, in fact. So I'll have to take a weekend off when I do that one. Ha ha ha! Let us see. But we're not talking about the Celestial Toymaker. We are talking about the Mind Robber. We're not talking about William Hartnell. We're talking about Patrick Troughton. And we're not talking about my guest advocating the Celestial Toymaker. We're talking about David J Howe, one of the early sort of, fans who were producing stuff and researching, and his own particular expertise is toys, but he also wrote a biography of John Pertwee and was one of the brains behind some of the early Doctor Who research that then, was transformed into the 60s, 70s, 80s books, the handbooks, and various publications that have all, laid the foundations for what has come after. Really important work that David has done. And I bump into him at conventions, and he and his wife Sam are always a joy to see. So I'm grateful that he went to such an effort to record a video for the Mind Robber, which you aren't seeing, you're just hearing the audio from it. But he really put the work in. Completely wasted in the audio medium. I might eventually put these on YouTube, but it's unlikely, to be honest, at this stage, because audio is much easier to do, and that's not because I'm phoning this in. Do you know what I mean? I will do my very best to edit it nicely, and I'm using a nice microphone and all of that sort of thing. But we're not in lockdown anymore, people. I haven't got time to be filming myself on my sofa, then cutting it together. So I'm sorry, people of YouTube. It's people of iTubes. that have benefited more because it's easier to get this stuff out there. It's also easier to get an episode completed if it's only 20 minutes long, isn't it? Doctor Who production team of 1968. So let's see how much of a lick they can get proceedings wrapped up in. Can you lick and wrap up at the same time? Is that a mixed metaphor? I suppose you can. Well, let's anyway. Let's see. Let's all lick and wrap together as we press play on the Mind Robber episode 5. Sorry, I thought I was about to be eaten then, and it's just the washing machine draining. You can't hear it, so. But what if you could hear what you thought was a monster is actually just drainage. Oh, this is the sort of stuff you get when you're not recording in a professional studio, but doing the homespun thing. It's like a window into my very uninteresting life. Anyway, here we go. We are going to watch The Mind Robber in 3, 2, 1. So, this is the final episode of The Mind Robber. It looks very short to me on my playing. I think it's one of the shortest episodes of Classic Who. So, this should be over. This should be painless. If you don't like listening to my voice, which of course is a very silly thing to be doing. Peter Ling, of course, created Crossroads. So I was always quite impressed that his name, because he wasn't a Doctor Who name, so I remember being quite impressed that his name was on, a Doctor Who, because Doctor Who was always given lustre to me by people that had excelled outside of the world of Doctor Who. I thought if you were famous just for Doctor Who, you were sort of tainted because it was the thing I loved, even though it was the thing I loved most in the world. But Peter Ling coming from Crossroads, because my grandparents watched Crossroads. Now, of course, and I've seen some Crossroads recently. Goodness me. I mean, we think that, some of Doctor Who's production standards are a fair stretch for a modern audience, but my God, at least it's trying to create space and stretch the imagination. So time has not been kind to Crossroads, it really hasn't. But I think at the time, Crossroads was even a bit of a joke. So actually, rather than Peter Ling giving illustriousness to Doctor Who by dint of his presiding over the grottiest motel in the Midlands, Doctor Who, I think, adds a charming little adjunct to his Peter the Ling CV. He did try and write. In fact, he tried to write for Who again in the 80s, didn't he? With Hexagoria, which is a big finish that I am in, playing an Australian boyfriend of Tegan who gets turned into an insect, only in Doctor Who. So I never had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Ling, but he did do interview for Doctor Who magazine, didn't he? And I think it's great that he's come from the world of soap opera, where he noticed people treated soap actors like the characters that they played, and I'm sure most listeners are aware that my current partner, I'm never an optimist. These things always hang by a gossamer thread. My current partner, well, she still can't leave the house, is a soap opera actress. She prefers actor, funny enough, interesting enough. She's a soap opera actor. She's not stroppy about it or anything. It's just she uses actor. She doesn't correct me when I say actress, but it's just what she uses. So I should try, shouldn't I? And so, we sort of know what it's like. I mean, I think audiences are a bit more savvy these days. I don't think many people stop her on the street and think that she's actually the character that she plays. But there are people who do, or who talk to people like their fictional version. And I think that's a great idea. I mean, it's not necessarily a thing I'd think about that would then make me write a Doctor Who story. But I think it's lovely that it did, because so often a Doctor Who story is, I saw that everyday object, seaweed, crack in the wall, a clown or whatever, and thought, I will try and make that scary, which is a very, very legitimate way of going about dreaming up your Doctor Who story. Oh, what's an everyday thing I can use to terrify the kids? But I love the fact that the format is such that you can also come out of left field and go, I've noticed that people think that actors who play their fictional characters are their fictional characters. What if there was a place where they all existed? And I love the fact that it doesn't bother to sort of explain the science of it. It doesn't explain the science of what it means to become fictional, which is what's happening with Jamie and Zoe here. And that's quite disturbing, isn't it? That you've got the sort of impassively faced Jamie and Zoe there, their personalities removed. They are, they are soulless, if you like. Perhaps that's it. Fictional characters don't have a soul. I love the way she says, "Are you a prince?" with sort of hope, and he's very forlorn. This very pretty Rapunzel, and I like that's her very single-minded hope, is that everyone she meets is a prince. And I also like the fact that, even though, the threat here is becoming a fictional character, the fictional characters, the whole world isn't against the Doctor. The characters within the fictional world, if they are nice characters, they're perfectly happy to help. And I like that. I think that's charming. Often Doctor Who is scary, often Doctor Who is action-packed, often Doctor Who is tense, and sometimes, characters bond together through bravery and guts. But here, the characters bond with the Doctor because they're nice people out of children's literature, and I think that's rather joyous and sweet, and it works with this most childlike of Doctors, Patrick Troughton. Seeing Patrick Troughton getting sort of matey with pictures from with people from picture books and fairy tales seems to me rather appropriate. It's like the sort of grown-up kid has gone to meet his childhood friends, even though, of course, the Doctor, we don't know this yet, but being an alien, is not perhaps as steeped in our childhood literature as we might be, but it's what Troughton represents, isn't it? He's a big kid. He's our childhood writ large, and so it's actually very sweet to see him. He fits really well surrounded by this sort of gaggle of kids who could be from a sort of E. Nesbit or somebody on Patreon when I said, they're not specifically from any work of fiction, but there's all those sorts of books, aren't there? The E. Nesbit ones and Swallows and Amazons and all those sorts of things. So they could be any, and Lion the Witch and the Wardrobe and all those have all got these sort of, posh jolly kids getting into scrapes, or not, yeah. He seems to fit with all of that. Troughton holding hands with a bunch of kids. I don't know if he does hold their hands in this. I don't think he does, but I can sort of see him doing that, and it not being remotely weird, and it not being massively sort of paternalistic either. They'd be kind of holding his hands as much as he's holding theirs. This is weird, isn't it? Seeing Jamie and Zoe so sort of impassive and personality removed. But fortunately, Emery Jones has had a week to wipe the spittle from the corner of his mouth. Which I suppose, you see, if they'd released this as an edited together video, as they did for a while back in the day, you could have tell where often people would write into Doctor Who magazine, so where were the cliffhangers? Where were the cliffhangers for the Seeds of Death Matrix databank? And they'd sort of list the cliffhangers. And sometimes you could tell because of the cut or the change in print quality or whatever, but you'd be able to tell this one because the master suddenly didn't have his spit in his gob anymore. Oh, Fraser very much enjoys being mean and evil there. And it's that's really disturbing, isn't it? And especially as they're slightly, because it's really hard to act laughing, so it is slightly artificial. But you could sort of go, but that actually, I think if a director seeing that, you'd go, actually, I'm not going to try and make that any more realistic laughter, because it is the sort of half-baked, forced cackle of an acted laughter, because acting laughing is hard, especially acting mean laughing, because actually people don't really laugh meanly in that way that much. I love the way he says sausages. Sausages, man will come like a string of sausages. And I wonder if in the script it was man will become like a string of sausages. And Trout went, well, I think I'll say sausages first, because he knows that him saying sausages kind of sounds funny. It's knowing your strengths as an actor there. It's like Rowan Atkinson with Bob. If there's a word that that you can say. I do it as a comic. There's certain words I know probably sound better coming out of my mouth than others. So you try and throw those in. But yeah, but the kids laughing, because it was slightly artificial, it did give it a slightly sort of surreal, unreal quality, which matched with the fact that, you know, the TARDIS had just turned two-dimensional and into a photo blow-up, and the fact that this is all the sort of fictional world, you know, bending reality or being an ersatz rendition of something real. And, you know, I wonder how early in the story this idea came out. I remember seeing pictures of this this climax in Doctor Who magazine, because obviously the climax is filmed with all those characters from fiction, this sort of big fight that they have now, and you sort of think, I wonder if, you know, when he was writing, he thought, yeah, I'll get Bluebeard, I'll get, although he wasn't necessarily, not all of them were necessarily fictional, were they, but I'll get Cyrano de Bergerac, I'll get Sir Lancelot, and they could all have a fight, and probably when he was thinking of the story, that was probably loomed quite large, but then as he sort of put it together, there's not much you can do with that apart from them having a bit of a fight. So, and I remember them having pictures of David Cannon as Cyrano, and I think they took close-ups, Jerry Wayne as Blackbeard, isn't it, of all of them, because there was a filming session, and so because there was, you know, time to take photos and all of that. So if you didn't know the story, you'd be led to think that these characters played a much bigger part than they actually do, because when you watch the episode, they're barely in it, but they were there for a lot of the photographs being taken. So you'd think Cyrano de Bergerac was actually a massive character in The Mind Robber, rather than somebody who's in it for about 15 seconds. But you could see why they would think of this as the climax, going, right, what's the big face-off? I mean, it does sort of actually sideline Jamie and Zoe, and indeed the Doctor, because he's all sort of trussed up and can't do that much. And it's it's given over to him suddenly, invoking a film sequence of headline fictional characters, or not, as I say it. It becomes a bit sort of blurred fantasy and reality. But this is a smart use of what it is that they're doing. Is going, right now the Doctor is writing his own fiction, and it means we can have, I'm sure, what was imagined to be a sort of, if you did this as a movie, wouldn't it, you'd have a big budget kind of painted backdrop, kind of, you know, battlefield between all sorts of physical fictional characters. Actually, all we have is well, I mean, we do go to film at least, so it's, you know, they do make an attempt to sort of broaden the story out, which has been quite sort of confined, apart from that little bit of location filming. And, you know, the face-off is basically the Master and the Doctor talking to each other, but they're essentially choosing their weapons. So here we are. Here's Cyrano de Bergerac. It's David Cannon, who we didn't really know anything about, and then a friend of mine who I speak to online found that he'd passed away in America 2 or 3 years ago. He'd become a practitioner of some kind, a general practitioner, or so, I can't remember now, but I'll put it in a more factual thing. But he wasn't acting in the States, and yes, I'm afraid he died about 2 or 3 years ago without ever having been sort of contacted about Doctor Who. D'Artagnan and Sir Lancelot is a wonderful swordsman, John Greenwood, who I had the pleasure of chatting to over the phone when his former colleague Derek Ware had passed away. Now, John was an excellent swordsman and became a swords teacher at drama schools, but had been the swords master on Olivier's Shakespeare films and done lots of illustrious theatre sword fight arranging as well. And he lived not far from my mum. He lived in Hereford. So I thought, well, what I'll do is, there's a few people that live around there. What I'll do is, when I go and visit my mum, I'd asked John, I said, when I'm next in Shropshire, can I come to yours? He said, oh, absolutely, blah, blah. Because I always felt it was nicer to interview people in the flesh. But of course, when you're talking about interviewing old people, what you should do is interview them as soon as possible. I interviewed him about Derek. I've got a little phone call I did with him about Derek Ware. But he's such a career, and because he'd worked with Olivier and stuff, I thought he might be a bit sort of, well, I'll have to think about this. And he was like, no, absolutely, yeah, come see me whenever. I'm, retired. And he obviously didn't think of himself as any sort of big stuff at all. He plays Sir Lancelot and D'Artagnan in this, John Greenwood. And in fact, I've just been talking to a friend on Facebook who he taught at drama school, who said that, she said he was absolutely lovely and an excellent swordsman, even in his sort of older years. but I sort of thought, oh yes, no, I should go round. I should bring him a bottle of wine. Actually, he'd have been happy if I'd interviewed him then. If I'd just interviewed him on the phone about his career, and I'd have that now as a record, and it would have been lovely. But I always resisted interviewing people on the phone because I thought it was better to meet them in person and to buy them lunch just as a sort of courtesy. But actually now, I think most people would actually be happier to just get it out of the way over the phone. They don't need to be bought lunch. They don't need to leave the house and go and meet a stranger. But my mind didn't work that way then. I didn't think, oh, let's just do it over the phone. I thought one had to meet people because you can interview and you can get perfectly decent quality recordings of interviews over the phone. But I always did that as a last resort. Now, of course, you'd do it on Zoom at the drop of a hat. But, I'm talking pre-plague, people. I'm talking from a time when Zoom was just a rocket-shaped lollipop. So that film sequence doesn't last very long at all. But as I say, you would think from the photos that we had of those characters that was a major part of the drama. I do like the sort of close-up of the guns of the white robots. They're very effective. They've made good use of these costumes. And now the sort of whole world goes haywire using a lot of footage from sort of previous episodes. It's as endings go, it's not hugely clever. Well, they've had the climax with the face-off of the different characters, but they basically get who built the computer. They basically get the robots to shoot the computer. It's a fairly straightforward. It's quite a rushed ending actually, but this is all very effective. The close-ups of the chest plates. He's not averse to doing close-ups of his monster bits, as we know from the Crotons, and that's actually not a bad idea, especially when you're on film where everything looks a bit better. I think less bold directors might shy away from that, but I think Maloney has the courage of his convictions, and this is all very well done. For a story that still nonetheless feels quite small and quite contained. There's a lot of these sort of VT shots in a small set trying to convey as best they can the sort of the cataclysm unfolding, the climactic cataclysm, much of which now takes place with just the actors and a black backdrop. I mean, it really is sort of done on the cheap, but as I say, I think this story can handle it. I love the fact he's got a copy of his own magazine. but it is a sort of, especially when next week we don't pick up from this. We don't actually see what happens to the master. We don't see them drop him off. It's one of those stories where the ending, especially as the running time is so low, is so small, where the ending does feel a little bit rushed. And I think next week you go, oh, I kind of thought we'd be picking up more blatantly from where we left off. But again, the fact that it's slightly awkward, that it's sort of, a bit like when you leave a book. That is the kind of end, isn't it? It's when a piece of a non-continuous fiction, whereas of course Doctor Who has to come back next week. The fact that it kind of finishes in a slightly odd and not quite fully formed manner, maybe again kind of lives with the slightly weird way that the story is. Jack Kine and Bernard Wilkie credited as the special effects, the founders of the BBC visual effects department, the main men who were the first two BBC visual effects department people. I was very fortunate that I corresponded with both men, and I have taped memories of Jack Kine. In fact, I've just been in touch with his daughter, who had found a little piece I'd done on Peter Day on my website and got in touch, and I said, oh, you don't know anything. You don't know that your dad sent me a cassette when I was a kid with his recorded memories of Quatermass and his career, and that he was really encouraging to me. He said some lovely words on that tape, just going, look, I can tell you're a kid, and you've gone about this the right way, and you keep going, and you can achieve whatever you want. Now, all stuff that he absolutely needn't have said. To me, this kid in Shropshire in the middle of nowhere, by a legend of the of BBC special effects. So Jack, whereas Bernard sent very detailed typed documents instead of tapes. But I'm in touch with his son. In fact, I'm in touch with all the children of the BBC visual effects people. And Martin Wilkie came to my comedy club not long ago. I've worked with Martin. I've written some stuff for his because he does exhibitions, and he did the Doctor Who exhibitions for a while. So I've written sort of captioning and literature for him, but he helped me with Bernard's obituary, and we've kept in touch over the years. He, he's often good for a number or something, but his daughter, I think, was coming to Manchester University, so he popped into the comedy club and was like, "Oh, who's this?" God, it's Martin, and we had a lovely old chat, and he was so pleased, and again, he was so kind because you see, you forget he sort of sees somebody like me. Not just, but as a kind of continuer of his dad's flame, going, "Oh, I'm glad people like you are out there, sort of remembering my dad." And I'm going, "No, your dad is a legend, and I'm really pleased that I'm able to speak of personal experience of that person because they were so kind enough to play a part in my life when they could have been doing all sorts of other things." So I see it as that the favour has very much been done to me, and me talking about Bernard Wilkie or mentioning him in an article, or just mentioning to his son that his work is important is that's no effort. It's the Lord's work, and the Lord ain't doing it. So I'm afraid Toby Haydock has to be his first. Not just me, as I say. There are all of us Doctor Who fans. I'm just lucky enough that I'm one that people like Martin may be aware of, but we all, don't we? We keep these names alive because we appreciate their work. We read the credits. Well, I think the most discerning amongst us do. The names stick, and we have the brains that can cross-section who worked with who and who did what with what, and we remember their names and we appreciate their work, and we see their names burnt into our screens, and we appreciate their work. So it's all lovely that. That connection still persists, and that's down to the internet. I mean, Jack Kine's daughter lives in Australia, and as I say, she didn't email me because she knew anything about the fact that I'd been in touch with Jack. So actually, I was able to send her the recording that he sent me, so she had something of his voice of him talking, and she'd never heard that before because of course he'd done it for me and sent it to me. So it's nice to be able to do those things as well. So this this fandom thing that we do, and this chronicling of this show, it's not just about in fact, how appropriate for the Mind Robber. It's not just about the world of fiction. It's about the world of fiction coming into our real life. The facts of fiction, the word, which was a great working title, which they should have used. But that world informing our real life, and actually, giving some meaning is perhaps too strong a word, but I think it's nice for people whose, parents have maybe passed on to hear from people like me or you or anybody that might talk to them and go, "Yeah, no, I know who your dad is, and he worked on something that means a lot to me, and he worked on something, well, one, at a base level, entertained me, and I still like, and two, is part of a show that has given my life meaning or shape, or given me, solace when I've been down, or cheered me up, or even just excited me, or just given me something to do, or helped with my professional work." All of those things. That is a way, if you are a creative person, who the idea that your life, or if your parent was a creative person, that their work might have inspired others, or even just pleased them, or still means something to them and is still watched by them. That's a kind of immortality. It's kind of those real people now reside in a land of fiction of their own, in the world of Doctor Who, a fictional program. We know the reality of those people because we're interested in what goes on behind the scenes, and that that's where they live now that they've outgrown this earth. And I think there's something very moving about that. And I'm always, as I say, I always think it's interesting when you stumble across a person because of their connection with Doctor Who, and then of course you find out that their life is so much bigger, better, and more interesting. But that's kind of what Doctor Who is all about in its own way as well. It's more than a sum of its parts. Doctor Who, it's more than just a family-friendly tea time science fiction show. It is now a cultural institution. It is now it is now so much more than the sum of its parts, so much more than it was ever intended to be. And that, of course, impacts on the people who consume it, and indeed the people who made it, and indeed the children of the people who made it back in the day. And I think that goes to make Doctor Who more than just a fictional programme. But he was wrangling with concepts of fiction, wasn't he, in episode 5 of The Mind Robber? What a strange story it is. I don't mind the fact that there's no great sort of twists or reveals, or what, once they've done the thing of going, this is a world where fictional people live. I mean, they do all sorts of lovely things with it, they make it fun and strange and surreal. But there's no, in terms of what the story is. But as I say, I quite like the fact that we don't have the mechanics of how it actually works and what process they have to go into. I mean, I would even say that the idea at the end where they go, and our actual plan is to invade the Earth, that's where it's kind of gone, so Peter, we love this idea of the land of fiction and fictional characters being alive, but this is Doctor Who. What's the threat? And he's like, okay, right, well, they want to invade Earth then. You go, okay then. So long as you give Patrick Troughton a line about sausages, it'll be fine. But I think all of that is actually less... I never feel that the Earth is under threat. Perhaps we needed to cut to a not very well written family going, oh, all our books have closed. What should we do now? Because that's not really what the story is about. It's about this strange abstract idea of what it means to be real and what it means to be fictional. And as I say, the Doctor sort of ganging together with all these people from the pages of books, which is sort of rather fun and interesting, and doesn't it's almost like he's gone, all right, well, I'll sort of give you a plot, but I don't really care. How does it end? Oh, well, we just get them to shoot it. It's fine, it's the journey is more interesting. That's actually often the case with reading a book. You quite often it's the memorable bits about a book are the passages, are the descriptions, are the characters. It's not actually... there's very few endings of books, I think, where you go, oh, wow, I can see why that's been building to that, But that's because there are a lot of books. I'm not knocking books. Right, so I've got to choose a favourite thing from that episode, and I've got to choose a favourite thing throughout. And I also can't remember what I've chosen for the earlier episodes, because this one I've broken up rather a lot, and thereby hangs a tale. It's funny, I love this story. I think it's brilliant. I think it's joyous. I think it's charming. I think it's original. I think it's inventive. I think it's abstract. I think it's strange. I think it bounces along. It's not dull. It doesn't overstay its welcome. And I always enjoy watching it when I watch it. But I never really want to watch it. Isn't that weird? Even though I know it's good. I know it's well made. I know it's got loads of ideas that when I watch them, I go, God, they've done that really well. The Forest of Words, the pages of the book, the toy soldiers, all of the characters are nicely acted and again, a rather charming. Gulliver is a charming, sort of stoical, heroic, nice presence. Rapunzel is delightful. They're all sort of rather joyous. Even new Jamie is good because Hamish Wilson comes in and gamely throws himself into it and does a fantastic job. It's all great, and yet if I'm looking along the shelf, it is very rare that I'll go, oh yeah, I want to watch that one. Even episode 1, which I know is just magnificent, I sort of think, yeah, but it's just the Doctor on a white screen, isn't it? And it's funny. It never makes me want to watch it. It's never one I'd probably list in my favourite stories. But if I had to score every story out of 10, I would probably score it very highly. But I would never put it in a top 3 or a top 5 or whatever. Even of Troughton's, probably, because I'm drawn more to the Base Under Siege, the more gritty, the more realistic in inverted commas, which is weird because there's lots of gritty and realistic television programmes out there, and I don't really care for them. I like Doctor Who because it's got that sort of zesty fantasy element to it amongst the grit and the action and the adventure. But it's weird. I prefer it when a zesty, children-friendly show is being gritty within its own limitations than I do an adult show being gritty. And yet when Doctor Who is the things that it is that make it unlike an adult show, zesty and frothy and fun and weird and strange, I go, oh no, I need a bit more of the things that like the other programs, even though those aren't my programs. Really weird. I'm trying to articulate why I think The Mind Robber is brilliant, but why I very rarely want to watch it. Isn't that interesting? Maybe it's not, but I thought it worth trying to rationalize, and the way I do that through the medium of podcast is to keep saying words until some of them make sense. I'm not sure I reached a conclusion there, but I think I at least articulated the paradoxical nature of my appreciation of this story. But I still haven't come up with two favourite bits. I think I will choose. I do love the design of the toy soldiers. I remember reading about them and thinking, well, what will they look like? And then I saw pictures of them and I thought, oh, no, they look really good. And then on the screen, with the noise that they make, the way that they move, the twisty things on the back, they're a really good, you can see, if I was Peter Ling and I'd come up with the idea of toy soldiers as my sort of one of my secondary menaces, and that was the design and the noise and everything that they came up with, I think I'd be delighted. I think they are exactly what you'd want in this, and indeed in the Celestial Toymaker, which that they have some, they would have not been out of place in. They are something pulled from a toy box and made giant, and without much change to what they actually are, but just for the fact that they're big ones and they're moving about, and maybe they've curved their mouth slightly, they look terrifying. Because they are a perversion of a toy. A giant toy is in a way that a clown can be scary as well. A slightly sort of perverted version of a kid's thing has an added sort of menace and strangeness to it. So I think the design of the toy soldiers is maybe my overall thing. And my favourite thing from episode 5 is, do you know what? Because I'm not going to win anyway, and I'm not going to try and intellectualize this for once and go, well, I think, because I did actually really like the way those kids laughed, even though I don't think it was, deliberate. I think they were trying to act menacing laughing, and it sounds pony because it's hard to do, so it's just not very good in a way, but it kind of works, as I explained when I was watching the episode. It does kind of work for this sort of strangely fiction brought to life, but not quite, but still being everything is slightly cardboard and fictional, including the people. I think that works really beautifully. I could intellectualize that, which is essentially a thing not pulled off particularly well, but by virtue of what we're watching and what we're doing, you can sort of say, yeah, but I can kind of see why that might work. But that's also because I'm obviously well inclined to this stuff, and it behoves me to always see the positive. Like I said once, we're Doctor Who fans, we see body horror where other people see sticky tape, and that's okay. I'm fine with that. But I think that would be dishonest of me, because I just noticed it when I was watching it this time. It's not a piece I particularly noticed before, and perhaps because I was in the navel gazing zone, I was able to intellectualize it on the fly. But the bit that always makes me smile about this episode, and there's a bit that if you had to go Toby Mind Robber episode 5, I'd think about the fight, and there's nothing wrong with the fight. It's very well done. I think it's a great idea having all those literary characters fighting each other, but it's quite cursory. As I say, you can see that they might have thought of it being, a really major part of the story, but then when they actually got it together, there's actually not an awful lot we can do with this. And essentially, the Doctor and the Master are basically saying, here's another character with a bigger sword. That's essentially all that is. So it's not particularly smart. It's just a fun array of characters from the books you had as a school kid. So that's quite fun. That's nice to have in Doctor Who, and I always liked it when Doctor Who featured stuff from other books that I'd read. Again, it sort of seemed to me to accord Doctor Who some sort of respectability, that it was invoking stuff from other sources, but especially sources if we had in books at our house. It sort of it made seem Doctor Who had its finger on the pulse of what was going on with childhood and childhood imagination. So that's very much to its credit. But actually in execution, even though it's filmed and so it's very nicely done, and John Greenwood was a fine swordsman and a nice man. I think I could probably intellectualize that and make a good case for it, but I think I would be being dishonest. I like some of the close-up shots of the guns firing and stuff like that, and I think I think that climax is well done, despite the fact that it's obvious that it's being done with very, very limited resources, but which again kind of lend themselves to this story. The fact that it's just a black cloth sort of says, well, but this world is made of nothing. I think all of that, I could intellectualize all of that, and in fact I probably have done. But the bit that I always go back to with episode 5 of The Mind Robber is the way that Patrick Troughton says the word sausages. And do you know what? When you've got an actor, and I could choose Troughton every week if I wanted to, because he's often the best thing about any episode that he's in. He's such a good actor. But I could choose Jamie and Zoe too, because I love Fraser Hines and I love Wendy Padbury. I could have chosen Wendy Padbury's sequined catsuit because it's an iconic costume, and I've never seen it. I've never seen anybody wear a sequined catsuit, and yet I don't bat an eyelid that one's in Doctor Who. That's the beauty of Doctor Who. You can wear an article of clothing that if I saw anybody wearing it today, I'd probably write an essay about it. Do you know what I mean? I think it'd be an anecdote. I'd go, I've just seen somebody wearing a sequined catsuit. What? But in Doctor Who, it just seems perfectly acceptable. So much so that I probably not even mentioned it during this whole 5-episode commentary. But there is all of those things. So I could choose Troughton any week, really. But he does have a way of saying certain words. He does have a certain style of enunciation that can be sort of alarmed and childish and childlike and sort of charming, and yet, makes you slightly scared at the same time. He makes fear sort of comfortingly funny without him sending it up. He's not sending it up. But the way he says sausages is funny. And the concept he's talking about, humanity all becoming conforming and personalityless and the same is a horrifying concept, and he's not at any point underselling or undermining that horror, but he is doing it while saying the word sausages, and it's funny. And Doctor Who is at its best when it is both funny and scary at the same time, and one isn't acting against the other. They're strangely, dissonantly complementing each other, and yet seemingly pulling in completely different directions. And that's hard to do. And that's the sort of thing you can only do when you've got an actor like Patrick Troughton, who can do both of those things at once, who will never stop you believing that it's scary and serious, but is also very funny the way that he says things. So, episode 5, it's the way that Patrick Troughton says sausages. I'll tell you what, if he chooses that, I'm going to buy one lucky listener a nice lolly. I don't know how I'm going to do that. And for the whole thing, because I don't think I've chosen this up to this point. I hope not. Otherwise, this will be a first. You see, my memory is not what it used to be. The memory cheats. My memory doesn't even know how to play anymore. Doesn't even know what game it is. I will choose the toy soldiers. I don't think I've chosen them before. So, David J Howe, what's he going to choose for the Mind Robber 5? Oh, he's wearing an Australian hat with corks on it.
So the final episode of The Mind Robber. Incredible story. What I love about this episode is the way the Doctor rescues Jamie and Zoe. He gives them the confidence to push open the pages of the book in which they've been trapped, and they actually manage to escape and not become a part of the fiction, which is what, of course, the master of the land of fiction wants all along. Apart from the line, sausages now will all become like a string of sausages all the same, which I also love. That's my favourite thing about that episode.
Well, hang on. You said apart from sausages, so you're saying sausages is your favourite thing, David. But you chose. That's a very good choice, the Jamie and Zoe thing, which I think I was probably. What was I doing? Talking about a regret I had about an actor, probably about a lost opportunity, some festering little regret of mine that I seek to I seek to exorcise through the medium of talking about out loud in a podcast. But of course, it's like a sort of confessional of going, I wish I'd done this a different way. Somehow by saying to you, it'll make any regrets I have go away. Ridiculous. I don't think it counts as podcasting, really. So I think I was doing that when that piece of action was going on and didn't give it its due attention. I always broadcast these with the caveat that I will miss bits, certainly dialogue, because the nature of it is I have to keep talking. It's not like a DVD commentary because I don't think most of you watch with the pictures going along, and I'm not with other people watching it knowing that the visuals will carry something. I have to keep talking, and that means I will miss some of the subtleties and some of the dialogue. And I think that was a good choice of David, because the Doctor empowering the companions and therefore empowering us is always a good and a positive thing, especially a vulnerable Doctor like Troughton, who's going, because the subtext there is, I'm a bit scared as well, but we can do this. And I think that's a wonderful lesson. What is it? John Pertwee says it's, courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing what you have to do anyway. And the Doctor, inspiring us to stand up and see it through, even though it's a terrifying prospect, is a good underlying message for the show, I think. But he did say that was his favourite thing, apart from the way that Patrick Troughton says sausages, but he wasn't brave enough. He wasn't brave enough to choose the sausages. You see, David, you may be one of the the founding fathers of Doctor Who fan research, but you're too much of a coward to choose the sausages, lest you think that people might judge you, whereas I have no shame. I'm a sausage man all the way. David, in that visual, is wearing, as I say, an Australian hat with corks hanging from it, so he should really be watching The Enemy of the World. And what's his final thing in The Mind Robber? Remember, I chose the toy soldiers. What has he chosen?
Welcome back, Toby. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching The Mind Robber.
Oh, hang on. That's his and what's his bonus thing for the Mind Robber, which bear in mind mine was the toy soldiers, so he's got something that can come from any or all episodes. One final thing, I'm nowhere near matching him for points. I've lost, so I will recede into the pages of a book and become merely a two-dimensional black and white photograph. But before that, let's see if I can just grab myself a little bit of respectability if David chooses, which I don't think he will, the toy soldiers. He'll probably choose something much more meaningful and profound that I'll immediately go, oh, why didn't I choose that? Because you were talking, Toby. That's why. Because you were talking.
Welcome back, Toby. Well, I hope you've enjoyed watching The Mind Robber. And did you guess all of my things that I like about all the episodes? I don't know if you did, but I've got a bonus one for you. So maybe you can guess what my bonus thing that I love about this story is. Well, it's Zoe's cat suit. She looks absolutely incredible. At the beginning of the story, she changes out of a Dulcian outfit that she was wearing from the previous story into this amazing glittery cat suit kind of ensemble that she runs around the story having fun in. She looks amazing. It's incredible, and I remember it from when I was a little lad, that I was kind of starting to get a bit of a crush on Zoe of Doctor Who. So that's my bonus item for you. I just wanted to mention as well, the other thing I've been doing, Mind Game. This is my novelisation, very proud of it. It's got Draconians, Sontarans, and a human mercenary who may or may not be really, really ace. But it's a great novelisation of some dramas, so I'm really proud of that. Thank you very much for having me, Toby. I hope you enjoyed the story, and let's keep on appreciating Doctor Who. Cheers, mate.
Oh, you see, it's horrible. When I see David talking there, I go, oh, I say hello at convention, we have a chat, but then you go, oh yeah, this is somebody I haven't actually seen in the flesh for ages, and it reminds me of all the lovely people out there. It's hard, isn't it? Because sometimes I think you look at Doctor Who fans and the way some express themselves on the internet, and not all people who express themselves badly on the internet are bad people and deliberate trolls. Sometimes, being a Doctor Who fan is quite a frustrating thing, and expressing yourself on the internet is quite a hard thing. And sometimes I think we worry too much about how other people express themselves and don't sort of give them the credit for having a universe of their own terrors to face. And sometimes, raging at at the way that somebody else has made or liked or watched Doctor Who is the way that people, I exercise my demons by talking to you about regrets I've had over meetings or otherwise with character actors. Other people, as I say, get online and vent a little bit, and sometimes not as perhaps articulately as they might if they were in human company and could see the expressions on your face. But it's when I see people like David, who I don't see really often enough, and when I occasionally, do come across a gang of hooers. If this is ever transcribed, that will read, if I ever come across a gang of whores. You know what I mean. It's a reminder that there are lots of lovely people out there who've, written about and chronicled and contributed to the archiving and history and research of this show, and just enjoying it, and just who've contributed to sort of social occasions where you can get together and discuss your favourite programme. And David is one of those, and it's very nice to see him. He did this, everybody recorded their contributions to this a while ago, and so he's holding on to Mind Game there. I thought he very artfully slipped in that there was a character who had an ace personality. I thought he did that very well. He did it better than I've just done it now. But since then, there's other books have come out as well. So do if you've enjoyed his contribution to this, or you enjoy this podcast, which if you're not a patron is obviously free, and if you're enjoying it for free, maybe support some of the work of the guests that you hear. So David's book on Mind Game, which is a Doctor Who sort of spin-off, and based on a video drama as well. So it's got, it's part of the rich tapestry of Doctor Who offshoots, and especially offshoots that were made when Doctor Who material was thin on the ground, and it was itself a rather neglected franchise. Poor old Doctor Who. I don't like the word franchise. I immediately regretted saying that. Old thing. It was rather a neglected old thing. I much prefer the phrase old thing to the word franchise. Haha. But I've just bought a book called This Is a Fake, which is from Telos Publications. But they've got quite Andrew Mark Thompson, brilliant designer and wit and creator of pretend tie-in merchandise. And Telos have put that all together in a beautifully presented book. But Telos have I've pre-ordered both of their production diaries of Hartnell and Troughton, which have been put together by David Brunt, who's been a great help with things like Too Much Information, one of the unsung heroes of fandom, David Brunt. And David's books look like they're going to be exhaustive and superb. So Telos Publishing, that David has published many, many books through his imprint, is a very important part of the Doctor Who publishing world, but doesn't necessarily get the coverage that I think it sometimes deserves. So if you've enjoyed David's contribution to this, please check out Telos Publishing. There's lots of lovely books there, and it's they're an independent outfit, and the more people that buy their books, the more they can produce the sort of books that I know, if you're listening to this rubbish, they actually produce some quality stuff that's really worth your time and your money. So yeah, go do check out David's stuff. So thanks to David. That was lovely to see him. I'm sorry he's had to wait so long for this. I hope you enjoyed going to the land of fiction, but that you're feeling very much still that you are in your very own factual world. I think it would be really interesting to revisit the land of fiction. I think it would be a bold show, but one day it will happen. It might happen after I'm dead, though. It might have to be a long way down the line, because it really will get accused of disappearing up its own fundament. But I think there is a story to be had, and I know there have been books and comic strips where this has been flirted with, but where the Doctor lands and somebody goes, "Oh, hello, insert name of actor playing Doctor Who here. Are you ready for your interview?" And that the Doctor lands in a world where they're trying that where the Doctor is an actor in a long-running television show. I think you could do really interesting stuff. It could be awful, but like all ideas of promise, it could also be wonderful. And isn't that the risk? And that's ultimately why I think the Mind Robber is so cherishable, because it's not probably isn't made up of ingredients that float my particular boat. That's a mixed metaphor. The ingredients are floating a boat. Where's your boat? In a bowl of soup. But for its ambition, for its difference, but then for the way that it's executed, it's not just that it's a good and bold idea. That's a slight change to what Doctor Who normally does. The director and the production team do everything that is asked of them. And actually, some of Doctor Who's disadvantages, the cheapness, the obvious artifice sometimes, really actually works in the story's favour. So I think it's a bold and it's a brilliant experiment, and I'm very, very glad that it exists. But I'm also very glad that I exist too, and am not, or am I, a work of fiction. Thanks ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest this time around was David J Howe, who you can find on Twitter at David J Howe 1. But please check out all his endeavours at Telos Publishing and beyond. I'm grateful to David and to the patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Ruben Herfindahl, Stephen Moffat, Peter Burns, James Culley-Smith, Peter Harness, Ronald Hayden, Rob Leonard, Christopher Meredith, Richard Straw, Neil Tate, Nick Tedston, Tim Arding, Nigel Bromley, Paul Cook, Richard Chalk, Peter Chamberlain, Grant Davidson, John Deere, Chris Dunford-Kelp, Paul Dunn, El Pandras, Susie Ferguson, Jason Gorman, Paul Harris, Chris Hyam, Ian Key, Ashley Knight, Joe Llewellyn, Philip Marsh, Nathan Martin, Roland Moore, Rick Moran, Kevin Murdoch, Graham Knott, Adam Parker, Barry Platt, Risto Matty Cirillo, and Frank Shales. The music is by Dave Gates and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you too would like to be a patron, you can go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where for as little as £3 a month you get advance releases, bonus releases, peeks behind the scenes at the various DVD and Blu-ray extras I do, interviews from my archive, and all sorts of other stuff. There is a free option. I haven't quite worked out what to do with that, so I've bunged out a couple of bonuses or exclusives there, but I sort of encourage the Patreon thing to be those who will pay from £3 a month onwards. They get all of the stuff, and you get all of the stuff at that lowest tier. So for just £3 a month, you tend to get about 3 things per week, so it works out as pretty good. And I understand that you might not want to sign up for a monthly commitment, though, so we also have the Ko-fi option, which is the equivalent of just walking past me as I busk in the underground and throwing a few coins into my hat. Actually, do people do that anymore? I don't think I've seen people busk recently, so maybe that's a reference that will be lost on the cool young kids who aren't listening to this. You can support these non-financially, and I'm grateful to you just for giving them your time, by liking and subscribing to my output everywhere: YouTube, Patreon, Spotify, Podbean, Apple, iTunes, all of the places, wherever you get these, basically. If you could put a few lines of review, the top marks, usually 5 stars, thumbs up, and as I say, follow and subscribe. It just really helps to get these things a bit more visible, and I'm grateful. And of course, I'm on all of the social media bar TikTok, because I'm, and OnlyFans. I don't have an OnlyFans, although I suspect it's only fans that listen to this, but only fans of Doctor Who, not OnlyFans people who I believe have to be nude. I don't know. I haven't got an OnlyFans anyway, although as I talk about it, I mean, I need the money, so maybe watch this space, but I'll probably do that before I do TikTok, because I'm not dancing anyway. But I am everywhere else, so don't go looking for me on the OnlyFans, but you can find me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on probably other. I've got my own website, and my comedy club is all over the place too on the social media. XS Malarkey, capital X, capital S Malarkey. Please do look for that, and maybe if you're in Manchester on a Tuesday or on the last Sunday of the month, come and see it. I've no idea what was on the post-credits of the original 5 episodes of the Mind Robber Happy Times and Places, because I will have done that, I should think, at least a year ago. I've completely forgotten. I mean, I can remember things about the actors that I knew 30 years ago, but what I did last year, no idea. But it's good to have David on the podcast. He definitely is one of the sort of fans who kept the flame burning and opened the doors up to the archive and flicked through the history books, and really during lockdown, not lockdown, but our equivalent, the wilderness years, bringing out the handbooks and doing all of the work that they did in research in the 60s, 70s and 80s books. It's really nice, and I now see David, and he's a jolly fellow. He's great friends with Fraser Hines as well, and actually helps Fraser when we're doing some of the DVD commentaries on Fraser's episodes. His uncredited scientific advisor is David J Howe, so it's nice to hear David there. Anyway, so if you want to hear the original, because I always re-record these for the omnibuses, I don't know why. Why not give myself an extra job? I could just take the broadcast files and cut them together, but no, I've gone back to the original mix and tweaked things about a little bit, and added new opening and closing titles, just like BBC Video used to do, and I used to hate it when they did that. So the campaign starts here for it to retain its. I could do that, couldn't I? I could just because you're only listening to this, so you don't have to keep uploading a new episode. So you could actually have the original closing and opening titles, and I suspect, being Doctor Who fans, you wouldn't mind. Why have I been wasting my time? I could have been tidying a shelf.